of the Geauga County Budget Commission. First on the agenda are prior minutes. We have minutes from February 5th and February 8th. We'll do February 5th first.
I know. Can I fit?
Just leave the status up on the end there.
We'll get it.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second. Aye. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Minutes of February 8th. I will move to approve. Second. Yes. Aye.
Yes.
And next up, 2024-2025 school district budget hearings. The first district is Kenston Local School District.
Anybody from Kenston, if you could introduce yourself, just so we know who we're talking to.
Yeah, sure.
Seth.
Seth Kales, treasurer for Kenston Local School District.
Steve Sayre, Superintendent, Kenston Schools.
Tom Manning, Kenston President, Board of Education.
Jim Henry, Board Member.
Good. Welcome, everybody. Anybody want to go first or?
Well, I think before we start with maybe Kevin, do you have like an overview you wanted to
No,
do?
mine are all incorporated in each
Okay,
district.
I had an overview.
Why don't you do yours first?
Okay.
Would you call it Jim's? And then we can do that also, Michael. Thank you. Here's the clicker. When he gets it up. Good luck figuring that out.
There's only 5 buttons on it.
Budget Commission.
There we go. Okay, this is short, I promise. Okay. So there appears to be some confusion or consternation as to what the Budget Commission's role is with these hearings. So we're going to talk about, I just want to do a brief legal overview of our duties when we're reviewing your budgets and your levying of taxes. Just gonna watch me click it. And then, so the Budget Commission shall ascertain the following levies have been properly authorized, and if so authorized, shall approve them without modification. So these are all levies in excess of the 10 mil limitation, which are basically all of your levies. So the main language that we rely on when looking at your budgets is that if we're looking at levies in excess of the 10 mil limitation, we should not allow the levying of any such taxation, regardless of if it's been approved by the voters, unless such rate of taxation for the ensuing fiscal year is clearly required by a budget of the taxing district or political subdivision. So I think you've heard us say this before, but we are assessing your budgets, and do you need all this money from the taxpayers? So when we're considering whether a tax levy is properly authorized and clearly required by a tax budget, there's case law and other legal authority, although not much, that guides us into what we're supposed to consider. So some of them are just structural, whether the tax will generate more funds than shown to be needed within the budget of the taxing authority or taxing district, or whether the funds are budgeted for the appropriate purpose as voted on by the electorate. So there's a couple things, you know, when you put levies on the ballot, there's purpose language, and that's what the voters see when they vote on your levies. So you can't tell the voters you're building a building, for example, and then use that for salaries. Those are the easy ones, but that is something we look at. We have to look at what the voters voted on, and are those funds being properly used for that purpose. I think the key thing that we look at, which again is a gray area, which is probably why there's been litigation generated from this, is but will the tax generate more funds than shown to be needed within the budget of the taxing authority or taxing unit? And when we're looking at that, I think the key things we look at are, what are your revenues and expenditures? What are your historic revenue and expenditures? What are your estimated revenue and expenditures for the next budget year? And then a big component of that is cash carryover. Maybe your revenues and expenditures are pretty tight, but you've got $28 million in the bank. That's something we need to look at when we're deciding whether the taxes you need are clearly required by your budget. And then we look at whether you had the power to impose the tax and the enactment of the measure was in compliance with statutory requirements. That's not something that we come across too often, but it can happen. And again, I think when you look at that purpose language and why did you levy the tax to begin with, and now you've renewed it 3 times, are you still using it for that purpose? And then we have to look at whether tax increases serve no function other than an increase to the amount of the budget surplus. One of the things, and one of the cases had to do with the shifting of inside millage, but one of the issues that we need to look at, which is especially important this go around, all of you had kind of a windfall increase in the amount of money you received because of the reeval. So some of you, 3 of the districts received, well, all of the districts received that windfall through inside millage, except West Geauga, which gave theirs back. But then 2 of the districts are at what we call the 20 mil floor. There's a minimum funding requirement for schools in the state of Ohio, and 2 of the districts in the county are at that floor. So the reeval had the effect of dramatically increasing property taxes for those 2 districts because of the floor adjustment. We're not here to talk about the desirability of your programs, what you spend your money on, how you spend it, how much you pay people, how much you don't pay people, what you're building, what you're not building, what you're maintaining, what you're not maintaining. That is not our issue. Now we'll look at those. If you've told us, hey, we're going to need to do this, or, in the example of one of the townships, we had, they kept telling us for years they were going to build this building and they never did. They still haven't. So, we're going to talk about what your projects are and if they're real and if they're budgeted and how much they're going to cost, because we have to determine if the tax money is clearly required by your budget. But whether you want to build, a bus garage, a new school, or a football stadium, that doesn't matter to us. It's just a matter of, are you taking in too much money from the taxpayers? So that's where it is. It's a question of excessive taxation, and that's where we're balancing your proposed needs with your income through taxes and your cash carryovers. That's it. So that's an overview of what our job is and why we're here and what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing. So I don't know, do you guys have anything to add or any questions?
No, you want to go into Kenston?
Sure. Okay, we could start Kenston's budget.
Anybody want to go first? Why don't I go first?
Okay.
Okay.
You want me to?
Yeah.
So if you could queue up the PowerPoint for Kenston, and then Kristen, can you start with the proposed numbers?
Good morning, everyone. Kinston Local Schools submitted their 2024-2025 school year tax budget with a beginning balance in their general fund of $8,979,561. They've requested revenue in the amount of $42,555,351. The Budget Commission will consider revenue in the amount of $41,727,903. Estimated expenses, $43,429,575, leaving an ending cash balance of $7,277,889. Their 2002 bond fund has a beginning cash balance of $3,029,319. They requested revenue in the amount of $813,100. The Budget Commission will consider $796,698. Estimated expenses are at $2,649,650, leaving an ending cash balance of $1,176,367. Their 2015 bond fund had a beginning cash balance of $348,059. They requested revenue in the amount of $478,294. The Budget Commission will consider $468,646. Estimated expenses, $587,731, leaving an ending cash balance of $228,974. Total estimated millage for tax year 24-25 collection, 4.5 inside general mill, 81.49 outside general, 1.08 for bonds, total millage 87.07.
Okay, so I have a brief PowerPoint to kind of go through some of the specific submissions by Kenston, but more importantly, what's happened across all of Geauga because of the reappraisal. And I will preface this by saying I serve on an organization called the County Auditors Association of Ohio, and I'm on two committees. One is the Property Valuation Committee, which was very popular this year. The second one is the Finance Committee, which deals with, in fact, budgeting. And I will tell you, Geauga is considered a poster child for how budgets should be evaluated. And that does not mean everyone likes how Geauga evaluates budgets. It does mean, though, that we are considered throughout the state as being on the forward leading edge of checks and balances with taxing the public for any enterprise, whether it's a school, whether it's a township, a city, or a village, or even a park district or any other government entity that receives tax dollars. The Budget Commission in Geauga is known across the state as being a tough commission. And I think that's something that is of value to Geaugans. So going through the Kenston scenario and how it dealt with the reevaluation, I think is very pertinent to evaluating their budget submission. So first off, this is the makeup of how the reval occurred throughout the county. And we break them up by townships, villages, and cities. That's how the reval is conducted. And you can see there's every village, every township, every city has a different percent increase. On average, we experienced a 29.5% increase in residential values. You have to remember, average is a very hard word. Most people experience something other than average, right? Because it's a mathematical calculation. So more than half the people experience something greater than 29.5, and about half the people experience something below 29.5. Thus, the average was 29.5. I tried to convert this chart for schools so that it's more meaningful. And that conversion is to identify what district we're specifically talking about. So in the Kenston district, if you look at the combined average between Bainbridge and Auburn, you get roughly a 30.7% increase, slightly higher than average throughout the entire county, because that's typically a more affluent area of the county, and the values rose more because of more turnover of homes. I also identified the relative school size on this chart. You can see Kenston's at the upper end with, over 2,500 students. There are some other districts that are far lower than that, but you have to put this all in perspective when considering the budget. This next chart is kind of an interesting chart. We looked at how the changes of assessed values occurred by school district wholly contained within the county. And you can see that in this particular case, Kenston had a total valuation from the reappraisal of about $1.2 billion. Their increase was over $250 million increase. That's a substantial increase. And of course, the math proves that. And when you do that kind of thing, certain anomalies occur with the calculation of taxation, not just for schools, but that occurred with taxation for townships, the county, any village or any city that will be contained in that area. We also rank schools, and we do this to allow the taxpayers to look at both a kind of a coagulant view, both of a full tax rate consideration and then what we refer to as an effective tax rate. So a full tax rate calculation is just adding up the total millage that a school is getting through taxation. When you convert that to effective mills, you move that money to today's money. So for example, a levy that was passed 25 years ago for 1 mill, the value of a mill 25 years ago is far lower than it is today. So you have to convert that mill dollar to today's number. So while everyone throws out the word total millage, I find as auditor, it has less meaning than effective millage. You have to put it into today's money. Old money doesn't really matter. If it's a very, very old levy, it may have been a 30 mil levy, for example, and in today's dollars, it may be well under 4 or 5 mils. So you have to take that into consideration. If you look at the two ends of this chart on the left-hand side, we ranked the school districts that touch Geauga in any manner by full tax rate. And then on the right-hand side, we rank them by effective rate. And you can see how they fall out. So we have extremes on the far left. Chagrin Falls has 123 total mills. That's huge. When you boil down their effective millage, it drops to 49 mills because the money is moved to today's terms. Jim says it's still huge. On the very, very far right column, we then did a 20 mil floor calculation. And you need to, I guess, appreciate and understand the difference between a total mill calculation or effective mill calculation and what millage is considered in the 20 mil floor evaluation. And most people don't know it. I will profess before I became auditor, I didn't know it. I really didn't care. And now everyone does, because when you have an anomaly such as a double-digit increase in reappraisals, the floor becomes very important, right? Because the boat rises to get minimum levels of funding for certain school districts. So the things you need to know about evaluating millage and how it's counted for the floor, you only include millage that's on the inside, that's inside millage or current expense millage. And the exception to that is if any inside millage is being moved into a PI fund, it is not counted for the total value of the floor. All of the other mills that are passed, whether it's a bond that's on the ballot or passed, an emergency levy, a substitute levy, none of those mills count for floor calculation. So you could see a school theoretically that has a very high millage and their effective millage could be very high, but when you calculate their floor millage, it may be very close to 20 mils because it depends on what kind of levies they have on the ballot. So you can see in this case, Kenston is sitting at the number 2 school district for total millage at 87. But when you go to the far right-hand side, it falls far further down in the pack because when you convert that to today's money, the effective rate becomes very low. And they're well above the floor. So you don't need to consider Kenston as part of a floor adjustment district. Okay, this next slide is kind of interesting. It points to, oops, let me back up. It points to the things that happened when the reappraisal occurred. Now, some of these happen anyway, regardless of reappraisal, but I wanted to point out what did happen to revenue streams because of reappraisal. The first thing that happened in Kenston is almost 1% revenue increase to certain levies just because of new construction. People built new houses, people added on to their homes. It roughly ran close to 1% of their revenue. The other thing that happened is, as we indicated prior, they received a bump in their inside millage because of the reappraisal, a 30.7% bump. And that correlates to $1.1 million, almost $1.2 million of inside millage money. They received no 20 mil floor adjustment. So there was no other adjustment made to their revenue from outside levies because they were at the floor, because they weren't. And then last, their revenue was protected because the adjustments were made to when the reval occurred, it increased the value of 1 mil. And in doing so, when you collect a certain mill levy, you have to alter, because the value went up, the multiplier that you use to calculate that tax. So tax rates in effect go down when millage goes up, when the effective number goes up. And that's just math, right? If you want the same end result and one number goes up, the other number has to go down if you're multiplying the two numbers together. This chart kind of gives you an identifier of what happened throughout the whole county, because what happens in the rest of the county does affect the school district. And so you can see that there were a number of entities that experienced some sort of an increase in their inside millage due to the fact that all values rose. The county, for example, received approximately $2.5 million more in their collection due to the inside millage increase. Townships, municipalities, and the city received a little over $3 million increase. Schools, however, received the lion's share at $4.6 million due to the increase in just inside millage. And then the column over to the right of that, the floor adjustment then kicked in for 2 out of the 5 school districts. Those 2 floor adjustments equaled over $6 million, which put the total load on the county of somewhere near $16 million total in increased taxes without a vote of the people, just due to revaluation. Of the school districts, one district did mitigate their inside millage. That was West G. They mitigated $1 million of their increase. But this is the percentage of the entities who decided to mitigate some of this increase due to the fact that taxpayers were not expecting this significant of a bump. The county mitigated about 87% of theirs. Townships and munis combined mitigated 65%, and the schools, thanks to West G, mitigated 9%. So 87.3% of the increase in taxes went to the schools. We're not here to pass judgment on that. That's just a mathematical fact. School revenue effect. So this is how they broke out with all of the districts that touch part of Geauga. And this is a bit of a long list. There's only 5 school districts that are wholly contained in Geauga, but we have some ancillary districts which have a few homes, primarily serving the Lake County area. In the Kirtland area, Madison, which one am I missing, Ron? Riverside, Mentor School District. There's a few homes that carve out. You can see Kenston, their inside millage was about $4.2 million last year. It rose to 5.3 and some change this year, which is about a $1.16 million increase in their inside millage. Okay. The next thing I looked at was enrollment. I mean, looking at a budget and looking at trends, you have to also consider the enrollment in the school, because certain factors go upside down with enrollment. They do. There's a base cost to a school regardless of how many students there are. As you get over a certain threshold, there becomes economies of scale. And you'll see in some of these graphs where it's evident the smallest schools felt the most pain to the taxpayer because their cost per student is drastically different than the ones that have more students to spread it over. In this case, however, you can see the enrollment dropped. I think I calculated about 100 kids in 4 years. That's about 4% by my calculation. That's a consideration that schools have to consider right now. With declining enrollment, the cost to educate those kids oftentimes can work against you. You don't divide them over as many children, but there are certain things you still have to provide. Next chart comes from the state, and this is a chart that the state uses very heavily. It's basically how much remaining cash you have in the general fund as a percentage of your expense in the general fund. And there are trends that are occurring, and you can see that trend. About 10 years ago, the average in the state was about 22%. So if you looked at the total expenses in the general fund, on average, schools were holding about 22% of that money on carryover for the next year. That has doubled on average in the last 10 years. Schools are now running closer to 44%. The blue line represents Kenston. The red line is the county's average running of all school districts in the county. And the green line is the state average. So you can see Kenston is actually performing below the state average for accumulating cash in the general fund. I think that's a good thing, but school districts may not think that's a good thing because when you run out of cash, you become more, you become more vulnerable to events that could happen that could cause you to go into dismay. Okay, to summarize their budget, I actually took a look at their beginning balance in the general fund. I added in the revenue as we certified it, or were proposed to certify it here today. And then I loaded in their expenses and I got a new ending balance, which would be a little different than what you submitted, Seth, because our certified cash balance is a little bit different than yours. It's not off by a lot, but it is different. I then ran some metrics of where the predictor will put you on that chart that we just looked at. It's going to put you at a 16.8% bubble on the cash to expenses, which is a decline over the previous year. Now, we have to all remember, this is a budget. This is not actual. The proof will be next year on how much you spend. Most entities realistically don't spend 100% of their money on expenditures that they budget for. Budgets are typically worst case scenarios. You try to come in under budget. Whenever you hear that term, gee, we're over a budget, that's always a bad thing because generally speaking, you anticipated a certain level of expense. You don't want to exceed it if possible. And I broke out the various entities and I divided it per student. I think that's a relevant metrics. A lot of people use cost per student as a basis. I know Newberry did before they merged with West G. That was a driver for them as the cost per student went exponential. They realized they cannot afford to educate children anymore at that level. And so we're doing the same thing here for comparative. If you look at revenue in the general fund per student, and I took all these numbers off the state numbers. I didn't use any of our numbers. I'm using state numbers just so that we're all on the same page. You're generally collecting $16,500 of revenue for every student you have in the school in Kenston. You're spending, however, according to the budget, $17,000 and some change per student, which means you're spending more for each student than you're obtaining in revenue. I think that's an indicator. Again, this is a budget. It's an estimate. It hasn't happened yet, but it's your predictor. And then if you look at your carryover, what you'll have remaining at the end of the year, you will carry over just shy of $2,900 per student in cash carryover to be ready for the next year. I did the same exact test for all funds. And the state doesn't do this. I think I know why, because bonds tend to skew these numbers a lot. But I did it just to see what the numbers would fall out. It's kind of interesting, but I don't know that it has a lot of practical meaning. I did the same thing then, added all the funds available, and I got a little different number, a little more optimistic number. You're closer to 20% of your cash as a percentage of expense. You're running $21,000 of revenue, $22,000 of expense per student, and then finally about $4,500 of cash carryover per student. So those are the metrics that I looked at. Then I compared them to other schools in Geauga County. So the far right-hand side is Kenston. As you move across, you've got, they're in the order of our hearings. If I could make this any bigger, I would, but we're struggling with the technology here. So we've got Kenston, Cardinal, Chardon, Berkshire, and then West G. The green bar is revenue, and that's revenue per student. The blue bar is expense per student. The red bar is cash carryover per student. And you can see the green bars are pretty flat. I mean, there are a few dips, but they're relatively flat. Expenses have a bit more of a hump. And then the cash per student is all over the map. So I think that's an indicator. I think it's something we need to look at and see what is reasonable. How does one district do it one way and another district doesn't? I think those are telling points, but nonetheless, we have to consider them. And we did a comparison of the cash per district. And this is where I think the teller really exists. Let me get up to speed here on mine. I can't see that. If anybody has binoculars, we can. Second. Okay, so this comparison is the general fund for this budget year only. It's general fund cash as a percent of expense. And so this is that dot, if you will, in that chart from the state that would occur if the budget were 100% true, if that is exactly how the performance lies. And you can see Kenston is by far the lowest percent to percent cash to expenses and well below the state average. Now, again, the state average is a mathematical number. No one has indicated, at least I haven't found, that there's a magic number to strive for. It's just math, and the math is showing a trend. So I guess if you put this though on that chart, someone could look at this and say Kenston is was performing well below what the state average is as far as cash remaining in the general fund as a percent of expense. Here's my comments specifically to the budget, and this is mostly for the benefit of a taxpayer that's looking at summarizing what they're looking at. So Kenston received 4.5 mils inside. There was a $1.16 million increase due to the reappraisal. They have 9 current expense levies totaling 81.49 mils. And again, remember, those are raw mils. That's not effective. They have 2 bond levies totaling a 1.08 mils. And just to note, those bond levies are not counted in their floor calculation, although they're well above the 20 mil floor anyway. And they are not at the 20 mil floor because they're sitting at 27 and some change effective mils in floor calculation. And then when I looked at their information submitted in their budget, the only comment that I would make regarding their budget submission, I think overall the math works. I'm not having any issue with the math. I do think though there is a tendency for everybody who receives taxpayer money to look at certain things that are occurring in the state government cycle and getting ahead of the curve. And I know there was a lot of I received a lot of comment and calls from people in the Kenston School District late last fall when they were responding to what they believed was a certainty with House Bill 187. They were of the belief that House Bill 187 was this imminent bill that was going to happen and that would change the whole makeup of how schools are funded and the whole calculation of how reappraisals were conducted. House Bill 187 only went through the House, never made it to the Senate, never passed vote. 187 looked nothing in the Senate, looked nothing like it did in the House. Absolutely nothing like it. I actually sat on the committee that reviewed House Bill 187 for county auditors and 88 counties. In the House, there was a recommendation that we took the appraisals and we did 3-year averaged appraisals. Everybody misinterpreted what that meant. What that meant was rather than do an appraisal every 3 years, I had to do an appraisal every year and then average those trends. It's not taking the 3rd year appraisal and dividing it by 3, which would give you a much lower number. So in some counties, when we did that true 3-year appraisal and then averaged them, actually the values averaged up and it hurt people more. So they threw that out. Many things in 187 were no good. And at the end of the day, House Bill 187 went nowhere. So my caution with school districts in general, and Kenston in particular, because I received some calls from that district, is please do not use hypotheticals. It's unfair to the taxpayer. Most people don't monitor the legislature. They don't monitor what is in House bills and in Senate bills and where they are in the pecking order. And until it becomes law and signed by the governor, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. It's just a guess. And we've seen that with House Bill 1 a year ago, year and a half ago. Everybody worried about House Bill 1. Never happened. House Bill 187, never happened. I will venture to say, without getting too political here, is getting any action out of the state legislature to fix this problem is very, very slim. I just don't see it happening. There's just no motivation to do it. So the one question I did have, Seth, specifically for you is, I know Kenston attempted to put a PI levy on the ballot in the fall. And I was asked to watch a video where that presentation was made, I think, to your board, like in the fall timeframe. And, you know, if I recall correctly, I think the math that I found was the PI levy was going to generate about $1.6 million.
1.265.
1.265, which actually makes my argument a little bit better. So that was your anticipation. And then in inside millage, you've received 1.16. So I guess my question is, how come in the budget submission, I'm not seeing, since the PI levy failed and you need 1.2 and some change in a PI fund, why isn't there a transfer in the general fund of that increase in inside millage into the PI fund to basically satisfy what the taxpayers voted no on?
There's over the last several years, we've averaged general fund to PI fund transfer at 575. That number will go up to about $1 billion. I believe that was,
Yeah, I don't see any transfer.
yeah, so we fully anticipate to increase the transfer of 575,000 on average in the last 4 or 5 years to about $1.2 million going forward. We have many projects, right? That's the law that we have. We have to do and have been putting off. Like you said, I mean, we're deficit spending. We've been on the ballot. It did not pass. The need is there definitely for the PI levy. This does impact our general fund greatly. We're one of 13% of schools who do not have the PI levy. So we will continue to have to do that transfer. That transfer will likely increase over time as buildings, older, more than has to be done. So yeah, we will ask transfer of at least probably in the general fund.
So, go ahead.
But you're mothballing the one building, right? So are you going to see a decrease in maintenance costs because your oldest building you're getting out of?
Yeah, right now I would say we're like winterizing it, right? So the maintenance costs won't be as much. So the heat devoting Board of Education is still attached to. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things to highlight, we've been deficit spending. We will continue to do so. Our expenses exceed revenues, like we projected here as far as per student. So we're doing everything that we can as far as consolidation, incentive programs to reduce and realign our student-teacher ratio, trying to kind of get these expenditures under control. So yes, we will see a savings from, like you said, consolidating the building, the maintenance expenditure. Like 82% of our overall expenditures are in salary benefits, right? So we will see overall from kind of winterizing, mothballing, so to speak, but it's not going to be significant.
I think the message that I got probably a dozen calls from people who either attended that meeting or watched it live streaming. And I think what they were confused with, or I think the thing they walked away scratching their heads, is it was construed by them that this increase in inside millage because of reval was really not significant to your budget, but it almost equaled exactly your PI levy. So the PI levy was significant, but the inside millage increase was insignificant. And I think that's a distinction that taxpayers grabbed right away because the numbers were so close together. And I get, at that time, it was this inside millage was being downplayed from some views, but I think at the end of the day, I think the taxpayers, they figured that out for themselves. They called and said, how much are they getting in inside millage? Well, why isn't that significant? It is it's almost exactly the amount they're asking from the taxpayer.
I think what we're trying to communicate is the increase in inside millage does not take care of the overall problem, which is we are continuing on a path and trajectory based on our 5-year forecast of deficit spending.
But you didn't put an operating levy.
We're going to have to take into consideration PI levies, operating levies, everything.
I understand.
I guess, the part I'm confused about it, they have these 10-year look back, right? They all have these.
Yeah, should.
Yeah. So
What is it?
this is,
a Hitchcock sheet.
yeah, this is my
The
favorite
blue- the
one.
blue
The
sheet.
blue and black.
On the back of this.
Is it on the back
Yeah.
of yours?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, I guess when you're talking reining in your expenses and these buzzwords and I'm going to tell everybody right now, the 5-year forecast means nothing to me because I have never yet to see a 5-year forecast that is accurate based upon past budget performance. Everybody has gloom and doom with their 5-year forecasts. And then I look at this sheet, there's no gloom and doom. So I guess you're talking about reining in your expenses have been flat the last 3 years, haven't they? Your actuals. I mean, let's look at your actual expense from 2020 to 21, 41,463,000. 21, 22, 41,599,000. 22, 23, 41,104 went down. So you did rein in your expenses. They went down. So I'm looking at 3 years of actual numbers where the expenses are flat. Yet this budget cycle, now we're jumping up $2 million. What are you spending the extra $2 million on? mean, your expenses have stayed flat, but you just got a $1.16 million windfall in inside millage revenue. So what are you all of a sudden spending an extra $2 million on out of your general fund?
I know general fund does fund capital expenditures. We have to do at least $1.2 million, like I said. The law could even be.
So it's a capital. I mean, you're saying 86% of salaries and benefits, but the salaries and benefits aren't what's affecting, those are flat. You've got flat budget numbers here. You're making a decision to dump more money into
No,
capital.
Benefits is increasing. It's increasing 13% per year.
I mean, I'm looking at 10 years of numbers here. I don't see those increases. I'm looking at the last 3 years. Your expense has been flat the last three actual years on this. Is that correct?
For 20,
I'm talking 2021, 21, 22, and 22, 23. In fact, now they haven't been flat. They went down, right?
so yeah, I think last year there was an elimination. This year we just assistant superintendent position, right? That's going to decrease some of those numbers. So we're trying to do everything we can in order to shore in the expenses. But no, I mean, I think if you look from, you're going back to 2014, 36.6 million, you jump up, you go down a little bit, you jump up. I see an increase in expenditures year over year. And I see the actual ending balance decrease cash reserves year over year. And we're continuing to decrease from what we had in 2016 of $12.3 million down to about $2 million that he has there.
So I don't have an issue with your cash reserves.
It shows that expenditures are exceeding revenues because we have a cash balance or savings account, if you're looking at to your personal self, that's decreasing.
Again, I'm looking at actual numbers, not projections.
I'm looking at actual.
And I'm looking at your actual for the last three budget cycles on here have been flat. In fact, they've gone down slightly. Now your revenues performed below those, but you've now just gotten a $1.16 million unvoted tax increase. So I guess I'm just confused where the projection is that all of the sudden, even though the actual expenses have been flat for 3 years, we're going to have this $2 million increase out of $2.7 million.
I think it'll go some of it to the PI fund, right, like $1.2 million. Some of it to purchase services, which go up. Some of it could be an increased Fed spending, which you increase inflationary numbers, benefits, right, or a big expenditure increase year over year, often into double digits. So then you're talking about $2 million increase year over year. That largely accounts for the $2 million increase year over year. When you pool all these different expenditures, which are increasing in purchase services, in benefits, and in capital expenditures.
Okay, I guess my point is it's been flat for 3 years and now it's going to go up $2.7 million. That's what's not computing to me.
Yeah, I guess I could clarify to reinforce what Seth is saying. We are trying to control our expenses because historically, and Seth can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think over the last 3 or 4 years, we've only been transferring about $575,000 per year out of the general fund into the PI fund. We know that moving forward, $575,000 is not going to cut it. We're going to need at least $1.2 million, which is why we put the PI levy on the ballot in the fall. So we're trying to hold those operating expenses steady because we know we're going to incur some additional costs with capital projects and PI type expenses. So as we look to the future, we know that $575,000 annual transfer, it's just not going to keep up with the buses, roofs, parking lots, heating and cooling, all those types of things. We've been band-aiding it, but moving forward, that it's just not going to work.
I think that's fair. That's fair.
And may I ask if the $1.2 million permanent improvement transfer has been approved?
Well, they don't have a PI fund.
Yeah.
So they're doing it out of the general, right? They're
That's right.
doing it out of the general fund? Is that
Has the
your intention going
$1.2 million
forward?
transfer to capital been approved?
So we transferred earlier $535,000, and as spend it, we'll do another transfer from the general fund to those.
That's not what I'm asking. Your testimony here is that $1.2 million is being moved to the permanent improvement area. Has that been approved by the board?
It gets approved as we move it. Yes, a portion of it has been approved already, and then the other portion will go forward to approval.
So in other words, the
$1.2
$1.2 million transfer has not been approved.
So It has not been formally approved at board meeting as of right now.
It would be to your advantage if it was,
That's-
because that would be an indication that that money has already been promised to go somewhere and the board has approved it.
Is it budgeted? What did you budget for permanent
Yeah.
improvement expenses in
We're
your?
budgeting for it, a little over $1 million to your point, but we have to also, I guess, to do the transfer, sure. Probably 8 years, next fall, we would look to revenues coming in for fiscal year 25. We say, okay, we're collecting revenues, we got first tax settlement, or we're doing the transfer from the general fund.
So for this fiscal year, it will maintain $575,000 as a transfer, not $1.2 million.
This fiscal year, right now, we're at about 575. It's approved at so far, with 10 to transfer some more money.
But you will receive the additional $1.16 million from the taxpayers this year. So you will have a larger cash surplus than the previous year.
No, because we'll spend it in the fall. Because we get 2 tax settlements, right? So as we get it in the fall, we will do another transfer this coming fall from the general fund to the PI fund. And that's probably what we'll do. That's when we'll get board approved to expend 265.
Right, if I may, let's go back to this blue and black chart.
Yeah.
If history is a very important thing to me about budgeting, it shows trends. And if you look at the history of 2021-22, the estimated ending cash balance was $1.1 million. The actual cash balance was $9.9 million. That's horrible budgeting.
Where did you get that number from? That 1.156? What forecast did you get that from?
Your budget.
Yeah.
These are so the estimated numbers are what are submitted by the political subdivision to us. So those are what you give us in those years.
I don't know what 5-year forecast you drew that from.
We don't.
No.
We don't use 5.
We don't use a 5-year forecast.
But you say estimated ending balance for 21-22.
Those were the numbers you gave us. That was the budget that Kenston gave us that year.
That's what I'm asking. What year did you draw that from? From that actual year, not a previous forecast?
The budgets are submitted the year prior, just like they are now. Your 2024, 2025 estimates are similar.
So, I mean, to your point, I'm not sure about the $1.1 million, right? I do anticipate that the numbers that I submitted were probably pretty accurate as far as the cash balances. But yeah, I can't, to your point, I can't speak to 21 or 22, but I was.
So to me, that raises a little red flag. It's off by a factor of 8. In any budget scenario, a factor of 8 is huge. So I know this is not going to happen this year, but I suspect you have provided testimony that you estimated the ending cash balance for this next year, $5.2 million, and next year, $8.1 million. I wonder what the real number will be. I know it will be a lot more than what you've estimated. It certainly will not be a factor of 8. But will it be a $3 million difference? Will it be a $5 million difference? Auditor Walder indicates it will be he thinks it's going to be around $7.7 million. That's $2 million of taxpayers' money that should be with the taxpayer, not being held by the school district or any subdivision. And right now, with the interest environment at over 5%, we are all very lucky to be enjoying such a high interest rate environment. You're making a lot of money with this cash that you have set aside. I would be very wary of submitting numbers that are not really close to actual. I have nothing further.
Go ahead.
I would just add, I mean, out of the 5 budgets, I thought yours was the best overall, weighing all the factors I look at. When I look at, and I love some of the charts. I mean, some of this is a little too much, John, but I love some of the charts. But, you know, I thought the cash carryover per student was a really good chart. When you look at your revenue per student, expense per student, and then cash carryover per student. I have a little bit of an issue, which is why I gave you a hard time before about some of the expense estimates. I'm looking forward to seeing next year if you do dump, you know, over $1 million into PI, which is fine. I mean, that seems perfectly reasonable to me. But unlike some of the other districts, I think that you're getting near the point on your cash carryover. If you do follow through with those permanent improvement projects where you're running a little too hot. I mean, you're getting there. I think if you're getting into the teens, you got to really start thinking about, you know, okay, what are we doing with these permanent improvement projects? Because that's what's driving your increases in your deficit, right? I mean, your other revenues seem to be pretty flat. I mean, your expenses seem to be pretty flat. So if the board's making a decision, hey, we've got to address these capital projects, that's fine. But that's what's going to eat away at your cash carryover. And if you eat away at it for a couple more years, you're going to get into a difficult situation, I think. Now, again, that's a policy decision the board's making. And maybe it isn't much of a policy decision if a roof's leaking. So, you know, I mean, if you got to spend the money, you got to spend the money. But I think when you look at revenues, expenses, cost per student, and then what your cash carryover is, if I'm a taxpayer, I would think from a taxpayer's perspective, they seem to be getting the most value from you, and you're holding a lot less of their money than a lot of other people are, which is a good thing if you're the taxpayer. So that's just my overall take.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I thought it was my motion.
That's your motion.
Move to approve.
I'll second. Before we vote, I would like to open the floor to anybody either online or in the audience who have any specific questions about this budget.
Questions for us?
Questions?
I think the question be addressed to us.
Are there any questions either online or in the audience? Nothing?
Not submitted?
Okay, hearing none, call the vote.
Okay, I got one quick, commenting with Kenston. One thing a lot of people bring up is cost per student, but there's one figure that's never thrown out, and that's the veteran staff that you may have. At Kenston, we have a very, I'm just talking us personally, but it's true for every school district. Every school district's different. Cost per student is, since we're 82% is salary and benefits, we're a service industry. The cost per student is drastically affected by your teacher salaries. And if you have a veteran staff of teacher salaries, at Kenston, over half of our teachers are in their end part of their career, which means they're higher on the salary schedule. That drastically affects our cost per student in comparison to another school district. So people who just look at cost per student as, wow, they're spending too much money, that's something we really can't control, of how veteran your staff is, because that can change. We have a buyout, that can change in a year or two, and drastically with no changes being made to our budget whatsoever.
I would tell you that, you know, while that needle could be moved a little bit with buyouts and depending on your staff and how educate, I mean, I would guess you guys probably have more people with Masters Plus and, you know, and so that's gonna affect the grade scale if you have that higher educated workforce, because that's how all these contracts work. But I was surprised when, you know, the cost per student isn't that radically different among the districts.
Revenue and expenditure patterns are not that different.
They really aren't.
It's the remainder that's the problem.
Yeah, it's how you're managing I mean, what I'm focusing on is how you're managing your money and how much money you have in the bank. You know, because I think, yeah, I mean, that's what we found, that those numbers are pretty, I mean, they're within a couple $1,000s a student everywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do the metrics, but the chart shows
Yeah,
The two charts, the two bars are pretty.
so they're pretty tight.
Not that
Right.
great.
I'll bet you, if you did the average experience per district and put that on the chart also, I think you'd see a correlation.
Well, again, I use metrics that the Ohio Department of Education uses. I didn't make my own metrics. So these are all from their website. The data's from their website. What I was afraid of doing is creating a new standard for schools, which I don't think it's our place. State Board of Education is the one that should be doing that. So if that metric should be considered, they will incorporate that in their charting. Everything came off of that site. I gave you the
I
sources.
get that. I just pointing it out
Yeah.
to everybody that is a huge factor.
I mean, people will argue cost, age of buildings have relative effect of,
And
right?
that is accurate also.
So, but again, those are not charted and those are things that we in this room may understand. But when you start loading that into a state database, it becomes very awkward. Okay,
Okay, we vote.
who did the first and second for the record?
Chris?
Chris made it.
You
I
second.
seconded. Okay,
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much.
and then we've got some papers for you to second. The next, hopefully we're going to pick up the pace here.
Well, you're a long power.
Just sit faster. And I would like to indicate, I appreciate members of the school board and the superintendent. I mean, in past years, we usually get just the treasurer and they take the arrows and they can't speak for the governing body, right? And I think it's important that members of boards of education attend these annual meetings because you get the complexion. I mean, you get to understand the complexion of what we look at, what residents say to us. And I think it gets you closer in touch with both of our roles and how they interplay. So thank you for coming. I appreciate it. Okay, we will move on to Cardinal. A little behind there. So if the folks from Cardinal can introduce themselves.
Stand, I'm 5'4", so you might not be.
That's all right.
I'm the treasurer, Terry Armstrong. I came aboard this past July. Superintendent Jack.
Welcome. So did you give them their, okay. Who wants to go first? You want to go through those? We'll start with the proposed numbers first.
And I just want to remind anyone that does speak, if you could introduce yourself and just give a street address so we know for the record who's speaking. Okay, we have Cardinal Local Schools submitted their 2024-2025 school year budget with a beginning cash balance in their general fund of $5,343,814. They requested revenue in the amount of $14,861 or $861,213. The Budget Commission will consider $14,693,339.29. Estimated expenses, $14,856,478, leaving an ending cash balance of $5,180,675.29. Their bond fund had a beginning cash balance of $1,155,837,000. They requested revenue in the amount of $288,903. Budget Commission will consider $316,217.68. Estimated expenses, $673,500, leaving an ending cash balance of $798,554.68. Their permanent improvement levy was submitted with a beginning cash balance of $131,733. They requested revenue in the amount of $789,400. Budget Commission will consider revenue in the amount of $694,802. Estimated expenses, $350,000, leaving an ending cash balance of $476,535. Total estimated millage for tax year 24-25, 3.5 inside general fund, 1 mil inside permanent improvement, 53.1 outside general fund, total millage 57.6. They also receive a benefit of additional revenue, which was not noted, from manufactured homes, netting out last year to $19,242.78.
Let's go first.
You want to do your PowerPoint?
Yeah, I'll go for it.
Or do you want?
Yeah.
You and I are gonna say the same thing, so.
Okay, so again, this is the same map we showed on the earlier one. This will go quicker because you've already seen it once. Again, the Cardinal School District regrouped these by school district to make it more meaningful. Cardinal being at the right lower corner of Geauga County. They averaged a combined residential ag increase in due to the reappraisal of 29%, slightly below most of the others. I will note they have a very low student count at 754. And they also are very close to the floor. They're not at the floor and they receive no floor adjustment, but they are within fractional percentages of the floor. Looking at their assessed values, you're going to have to read these, Jim, because I can't see. The total value looks like 4 billion.
Where? No,
Let me call it up here.
453 million.
453 million. That's a long way later. They had $90 million of change value due to the reappraisal, which is significant, but of course these are all percentage based. If you look at their ranking, again, on the left-hand side is full rate, on the right-hand side is the effective rate. You can see they rank 8th of the full rate of all the schools that touch Geauga. They rank last in effective rate on the far right-hand side of all of those that touch Geauga. And they're currently sitting at 20.29, almost 20.3 mils when compared to the 20 mil floor. So they're within 0.3 mils of hitting the floor. And again, once they hit the floor, if a change of valuation occurs, it dips them below the floor, they will be adjusted up accordingly. When we evaluate the floor, we only count inside millage except PI transfers, and we count current expenditures, but we don't count any other levies. One note is they are very close to the floor, and if they become at the floor, they do transfer some of their inside millage to a PI fund. The effects they saw a 1.25% average increase due to new construction. That increased some of their levies to give them more revenue in that regard. They received a 29% average increase in revenue due to inside millage, which is about $400,000. They were not at the 20 mil floor, but very near it. And of course, tax equalization balanced the vote for them. Anybody that had an increase in value paid a little bit more tax, and it took it away from people below the average. That's how equalization works. Some people think that if values go up, or if somebody's property gets reduced in value, that tax goes away. It doesn't. It gets shifted to somebody above the value. This is the chart showing, again, how the reappraisal affected all governments. In the case of schools, there was no mitigation performed by Cardinal for the inside millage increase, and the averages were still 9% for schools. 87 and some change percent went to the schools of the total money obtained through reevaluation increase. Of the school effect, you can see where Cardinal lied in the pack at $400,000 of inside millage. They received no floor adjustment. You can see how they kind of ranked with compared to the other schools in the area. Similar to some of the other schools, Cardinal is suffering from a declining enrollment. I think my math showed they were looking at a 13% reduction in the last 4 years. That's 113 students. That's significant when your student base is relatively low to begin with. That's a cause for concern, I would think, but nonetheless, it's the anomaly of the math. Their cash as a percent of expenses is doing something kind of unusual. They were well below the state average. Again, the blue line is Cardinal Schools percent cash as a percent of expense. The red line is the county average, and the green line is the state average. And if you look, they were well below both the county and the state average of cash as a percent of expense. And then an anomaly happened a few years ago that their cash started to accrue. And I'm not beginning what caused that, but that phenomena is occurring. It appears,
I'm gonna ask about it.
well, I figured you would, but nonetheless,
If he doesn't, I would.
that anomaly is occurring. So again, I did their math with the new numbers that are being proposed to be certified today because it will change their budget. You can see that it ended up with a cash balance that equates as a percent of expense to almost 35%, 35%, which if we go back, they were, what's the percent number on the far right hand side there, Michael? The blue line, the bubble, what's that?
This thing's, oh, that's 20, it's 39.9.
39.9. So this shows that you will be dropping slightly. So it appears as the increase has reached a pinnacle. It's on the downward trend now. That's what it appears to me. If you look at the general fund revenue per student, again, you have to remember this is a very low student count. You're a little over, you're about $19,500 per student. Expenses, you're running about $19,700. Again, your cost per student is exceeding your revenue per student. And if you look at your cash carryover per student, again, this is based on the budget, it will run about $6,871 per student. If you do that for all funds, the dynamics change a little bit, but not a lot. Your percent of cash to expenses goes up a little bit to 37.9, almost 38%. Your total revenue per student goes up again to 21,000. Yeah, 21,000. Your cost is 23. And your total carryover per student is slightly higher as well. If you look at this in chart form, it's the second grouping of three. You can see that of all of the school districts, Cardinal has the highest cost per student. That's the green bar. Again, I attributed this primarily to a very low student count. Building a building and housing students, if you have a very low student count, building costs don't change dramatically as you increase past a certain threshold. And likewise, so their revenue is slightly higher, as is their expenditures, which I would expect based on the student count. Their cash carryover per student is, well, I guess it's higher than I would have expected, but it is what it is. That's what the math showed. Look at their 2024-2025 budget. The general fund cash as a percent of expense, they are about third in the county as a percent. Again, they're below the state average, but they were rising closely towards it, which I think is an indicator. And my budget comments are, these are how their levies are funding their school. They have a total of 58.74 mills. They have three and a half of their inside mills are going to the general fund. 1 mill is going to a permanent improvement fund. They have 6 current operating levies at 53 mills and some change, 1 bond levy at 1.14 mills, and they're at 20.29 and some change when you compare them to the floor of 20. So that's a cause to be watching. I guess I'm not causing an alarm. I'm just saying they're close to the floor. My only comment from the budget submission, and for what it's worth, you provided to us a statement of fund activity is one of your required submissions. And in that, there are funds with revenue other than from taxes. That's what you're identifying in that particular submission. I noticed you included your debt service fund, which is collecting tax and being served from. So that should not be in that submission. That should be outside of that submission. Otherwise, when I take total numbers and I start looking at these metrics, I'm counting tax twice, right? Because you're telling me it's outside of the tax and I'm thinking it is, but it's included in it. So just again, it's just something that irritates me. That's all. So I'm just bringing to your attention that probably that should be taken out of that particular report, put into a different one. That's it. And I did this in record time for the record.
Do you want to go first? You can go on this one.
Terry and Jack, you have that blue and black
Yes, we
sheet. Clearly, something happened in 2021-22 where the estimated ending cash balance was going to be $2 million, but you got 3.5 in real cash. And then that grew by $1.5 million the next year. Can you highlight what has happened?
Yes, be glad to. Much of that was the opportunity that ESSER funding from the federal government gave us a chance to supplant some expenses from the general fund. You'll see a correlation there. A lot of money was moved out of general fund expenses to ESSER expenses. The other part to that, when the fair funding law went into effect, one of the positive things for the school, for any school, was the money that you used to spend on people that left your district, whether that was open enrollment or whether that was to non-public schools. It used to get directly deducted as an expense from your district. That went away 2021, I believe it was. So you'll see some of that impact there as well on the expenses. So that accounts for those bigger characters. Really good opportunity at Cardinal. And I did a deep dive, and luckily Seth's still in the county and that's who I replaced. So talked to him a little bit as well. And that was a strategy that was used by our board, superintendent and treasurer at the time. We carried that forward. Of course, that starts to decrease this year because we spent a lot of our ESSER money already. And then next year, obviously ESSER goes away. Mr. Cunningham has worked with the board for some plans to mitigate some of those expenses, because you can't just throw all that back in the budget over time. We are proposing to close the building, similar to what Kenston's doing. They closed the building already, as you can see with the lower enrollment it was needed. Also, there's some programs that Mr. Cunningham has worked with to bring some money into the district as well, outside of the taxpayers. So we're trying everything we can to mitigate all of our needs, direct the money towards students.
So Terry, you're finishing up this school year. Previously, we were advised that the estimating any cash balance would be around $5.9 million. You think it's going to be really close to that?
I do. The only caveat to that is we are refunding a bond. The reason was it wasn't really interest rates, but there was a high interest rate on this bond as it was 5.25%. That was taken out in 2018. We paid that off early through a refunding, but the reasoning was that bond that existed encumbered all of our properties. So to enable us to close a building, sell a building, get some revenue, get that off our books, limit our expenses. That may cause a little bit of a lower carryover because we had to front load about 1.5 years for bond payments.
Is that a capital bond?
No, it was a district funded bond. It was a ground lease is what it was.
That's not going to be, that's not through the general fund.
No, that's
through the general fund. It was not a bond levy. It was not a bond levy fund. This came from the general fund. It was always part of the general fund expenses for a transfer out to a bond fund that was
It's your refunding bond, right?
correct.
So it's only being funded through the general fund by a transfer.
Correct.
You're not servicing it out of the general fund.
No.
So when you refinance, the ripple effect will be, the balance will be adjusted in the refunding bond fund, either be lowered or higher depending on how you refund it.
Yes,
That'll ripple up through into the general fund.
yes, but also the immediate impact was also we had to pay 1.5 years worth of payments into an escrow, and that had to come out of the general fund.
Okay.
So that will impact that 5.9. And I will tell you this, we just closed on it last week. So
Well, that was smart business thinking. Your overnight rate's over 5% right now, and you had a long-term bond at 5%. Just make it go away. So Chuck, will that $771,000 move into the general fund?
It will end up being reflected somewhere in the general fund if it's a transfer.
So the year following, it should be zeroed out.
It should be a one-time occurrence, right?
It's closed.
Once the delta
you're
occurs.
talking the bond that we just refunded.
Yeah.
No, there will be a $400,000 expense each year because there was still 15 years left on that bond that we refunded.
Why? Just close it. You're paying 5%. You're making 5% on overnight money.
Correct.
Why would you hold on to it?
We had to refund. Okay, so the bond that was taken in 2018, it was taken in 2018 at 5.25. Okay. That encumbered all of our properties, everything. So we had no flexibility with our properties, knowing that we are going through some downsizing, some right sizing. We need to get rid of a building and limit our expenses there. We had to refund that bond so we can get those properties out. So it was really to get those properties out. So we have some flexibility with those properties. So what we had to do, because you could not refund that bond until April of 2025. So
Without a penalty?
without a penalty. So we had to put that in escrow. Now in the escrow, they give you the interest. So I could share that with the commission. They give you the interest you would make in that escrow. So it's not like we lost the ability to get that.
It's just a wash.
That interest, correct. But that loan doesn't go away. I'll just call it a loan. That bond loan does not go away. We still have 15 years left to pay on it. The whole purpose was to transition it so we could get flexibility with our property. Because if not, we couldn't sell our properties because it was in a ground lease, and that's how those work.
I guess Chris's point or my question would be, if you're paying over 5% on a loan and you've accumulated all this cash over the last several years,
Making 5%.
yeah, why are you?
You should just take what you're making, should be servicing.
The cash accumulation was because of ESSER supplanting. That ESSER is going away. We're going to need those funds to operate. You could see on the estimated expenses how they go up, which I can understand why that looks that way because it correlates to.
So you show $1 million increase in your general fund expenses over last year.
Yes,
And you're saying that's due to this bond.
no, the $1 million expenses is people moving from ESSER to the general fund. So we were.
If your revenues have gone up, I mean, even with that, you're still only projecting a $200,000 and general fund difference between revenue and expenses.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
And you have-
$700,000 from the refunding bond. That's cash. It's going to go in the general fund, right?
Is that accounted for in your estimated ending cash balance in the general fund, the 700,000?
The old loan is the one that was taken in 18 because we had to fund that from the general fund.
That's indicated in your refunding bonds fund, that your ending balance is $771,000. That's it.
So that's the bond fund we have. It's a taxpayer funded bond that's actually coming off the books in about a year and a half. That's that one. This is a COPS loan, certificate of participation loan, that's separate.
So how are you reporting that?
Well, before it was, and I'll tell you, it was a mix. There were some years it was paid out of a permanent improvement fund. There were some years it was paid out of the general fund. We are paying it out of a bond fund. Our intention is to move that into a bond fund. So, and I have talked to the state auditors to make sure that.
Okay, that seems to be the disconnect here is we're used to seeing when there's a bond, there's a fund associated with it. We can track it independently of the other funds. You're showing a refunding bond, but that's not the bond you're talking about.
Correct.
That's being serviced by a combination of the general fund and a permanent improvement fund from history. And so we're trying to make all that work and we have no understanding of, we don't get that granularity.
Yeah, that's the expense side of that 2018 bond we were paying up until this year would have been out of this year, the general fund would have been a transfer from the general to a 002 to a bond fund.
You seeing the transfer? Giving us a schedule of transfers?
I can do that.
Yeah, we usually ask for that, part of the budget documents.
I didn't know if you did it.
Yeah, so we're gonna need that schedule of transfers. Otherwise, we don't know where the money's going. It looks like an expense to us rather than a
It's an
transfer.
expense out of the general fund.
Well, it is, but if you're putting it in another fund and then expensing it, it's counted twice, which you don't want to do.
And I say that this is, so the tax budget you have in front of you accounted for the 2018 loan that was in existence. The one we just closed on, that's why when the question was asked, is there anything that would impact our carryover next year? That's why I brought this up, because this refunding will cause a little bit of a change in the carryover because we front loaded the escrow. One was a lower amount of interest that we would have.
You good?
No, go ahead.
Can I, I'm gonna, do you mind if I move on to the permanent
Yeah.
improvement fund? So I'm looking at the permanent improvement fund and you've got in 21, 22, you're estimating an ending balance of 153,000 and you really ended up with 500, $500,000. Then the next year, 22, 23, you estimated that you're going to end up with 170,000 and you ended up with $667,000. And you've assigned one of your inside mills to permanent improvement. So that's going to go up because of the reval. You're going to have added income in there. So I guess, and then in 23, 24, you've estimated an ending balance of $14,000 in that fund. I'm going to make a strong prediction that that's way off.
But that was not him. He
That
wasn't
was
here.
under predecessor.
I understand, but so I guess my point is we're looking at cash carryover. You've had a dramatic increase in cash carryover in your general fund. I mean, from 1920, you went from you went from $500,000 to over $5 million, 3.5 years later. I mean, that's a big deal. But I think we also have to look at your cash carryover in your permanent improvement fund because that has been grossly misstated estimate, and that's not your fault, but that's,
I can address that.
sure.
Well, there was a property sold and that money was put into the PI fund. So that did for an annual, like it would go up. So
So that was that when the actual revenue hit 1.1 million in 22, 23?
that, and there were some transfers. I was looking back to make sure I understood. There were some transfers into the PI fund from the general fund as well.
So you're thinking about closing another building?
Yes,
Okay, so that'll drive your maintenance costs down, you think?
that's the intent. And also we hope to sell that building. At least that's our recommendation, to bring some money into the PI fund.
Okay. I would tell you, and again, I know you're new on this and so you're having to answer for the last couple of years of some issues here, but I would kind of tell, I'll be honest with you, when I was looking at this and I'm looking at the trends and the amount of cash and that you got this extra $400,000 because of the reval, this windfall, right? I was leaning towards reducing your revenue by that amount. But I feel like, this is just my opinion, I feel like you're in the warning stage. So I'm going to tell you what I told Chardon last year. I don't like this. I don't like the trend. I think that, again, cutting expenses is a great thing. But you're still funneling money into a PI fund that seems to be overfunded. Your general fund cash balances have exploded. You're right at the state average. So but you're getting to a point where if these trends continue for a year or two, I would be voting to take away revenue. That's just where I'm at. But I thought about doing it this year. I don't think that would be fair. So
I appreciate your consideration there because I think you will see with the ESSER supplanting, because we're talking a lot of payroll being moved from one general fund to ESSER. That made a huge difference in cash carryover, as well as unfortunately, like a lot of districts, we lose a lot of kids in open enrollment. We lose a decent amount to non-chartered or non-public schools, charter schools, online. And in 2021, those all hit the expenses. And then with the new funding law, those aren't expenses anymore. They're just direct funded. So that does account for a lot of decrease in expenses. So I do appreciate you giving us time. I think you will see a lot of that.
Well,
I think it came off the rails in 2017, 2018, from what I'm looking at in the PI fund, where the estimated ending balance provided to the Budget Commission was $85,000. And the actual was 4.9 million. Right? And you say, okay, maybe that's an anomaly. That's a huge anomaly. But then the next year, the estimate was $155,000 estimated ending balance. and the actual was $1.8 million. So we're up by orders of magnitude. And it seems like that ending balance prediction is going all over the map, right? It's going, and it's flipping then the next year, right? It's estimated 1.7 million US, or not you, the school estimated, but in actuality, less than 500,000 was actual. So now we're the opposite end. It's just, especially when this is funded through a combination, you have a levy as well, or is it only through inside millage?
For PI, it's just 1 mil inside.
Okay, so, and especially now when more revenue is going there because of the boat rising, that number could actually get amplified. And that's the worry. The predicted to actual is not in, it's not in control. It's out of control. That's what I would observe from this. And if you look at I just looked at your expenses in the general fund, estimated versus actual, they're pretty good. I mean, you're within $1 million every year. And on a $15 million nut, that's only 10%. I mean, I wish everybody did that. But then you jump to the PI and it's like all the rules went away. It's just mass chaos. I think that's the angst you're hearing from us. And so, and because generally people only focus on the general fund, I mean, the state does what they're charting, budget commissions typically do. You got to look at everything, right? Because you're in fact using inside village to fund this PI. So we don't want it to become a diversionary tactic where people put it there because it's not going to be watched and then it can be used however they want. That's our concern.
Yeah,
Mr. Cunningham has heard me say, I come from the school of don't estimate what you can calculate.
Yep.
It's a mantra with a lot of school treasurers. So we will continue to address that. And I think you'll see it's much more in line.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges you have, I mean, you by far have the highest expense per student. You also have the highest revenue per student too. So, but I think,
Lowest student count.
and that's the problem. I mean, you're kind of almost getting in that Newberry territory, right? Where, you know, there's a fixed cost to running a school. And if your student counts are just low, it's going to drive that number higher because, you know, you need so many, you know, everybody's got to have a school nurse. At least I hope everybody does. You know, there's certain things you have to have in every school district. And so there's a fixed cost associated with that. And I think that's what Newberry ran into. But, you know, I mean, if you did below 700 students district wide and you're looking at some of these, you know, these revenue and cash carryover numbers, I think you need to examine some more structural changes.
We have some, obviously, economies of scale issue, you know, things to overcome. We have, you know, state funding. We're a type 1 district. I don't want to get into weeds, but that means we're high poverty rural district, you know, according to Ohio Department of Education. We're the only one like that in the county. We get about 3,300 per student from the state. And that's based partially on, this is what I want to tell you, what your local people should be paying, but they don't make them, obviously. So the average of the type 1 district is over 8,000. We have like, and a lot of that's attributed to pretty high property values, but to be frank with you, lower middle income community. So that presents some challenges for us, but Mr. Cunningham and I are working on some things to overcome.
Hey, you know, it might be the only type 1 rural poor district in the county, but you're not at the 20 mil floor like a couple of your fellow districts here. So but we'll get into those later.
Chris, do you have anything?
I have nothing further.
Who's
Your motion.
No, sure. I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Aye.
Let's before we vote.
No.
Is there any public comment or question regarding Cardinals submission? Anything online, Michael?
No comment?
Before you go, Jim,
Oh, yeah.
all in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Aye.
So we've got some papers for you, Terry, before you go. And again, thank you to the superintendent. We always appreciate when superintendent or board members attend these. I think there's big value to that.
Terry, I look forward to next year's hearing.
I think he does too. Okay. Just bear with us here. We're just going to wait for Jim to return. Okay, we'll open the next hearing for Chardon School District. Could people from Chardon introduce themselves?
Good morning, Mike Hamlin, Superintendent of Chardon Schools. To my left, Karen Blankenship, Board of Education President, Deb Armbruster, Treasurer, CFO, and Board of Education member James Smithia.
Thank you. We'll start out with the proposed numbers. Kristen, can you input?
Chardon Local Schools submitted their 2024-2025 tax budget with a beginning cash balance in their general fund of $23,465,233. I'm going to say $23,465,233. They requested revenue in the amount of $40,031,935. Budget Commission will consider $39,252,814. Estimated expenses are at $45,032,925, leaving an ending cash balance of $17,685,122. The Permanent Improvement Fund has a beginning cash balance of $121,103. They request revenue in the amount of $1,897,696. The Budget Commission will consider $2,289,659. Estimated expenses are at $2,396,441, leaving an ending cash balance of $14,321. The difference in the permanent improvement revenue is the debit fund, which is basically a wash fund to support a tax anticipated note. They have a beginning cash balance of $26,669, of which $411,100 is requested, which the Budget Commission will consider with matching expenses, leaving an ending cash balance of $26,660. Total millage for tax year 2023-24, 3.5 inside general, 1 mil permanent improvement inside, 74.18 outside general, 2 mil outside permanent improvement. Total millage is at 80.68. They also receive income revenue from manufactured homes. Net distribution in tax year 23 for tax year 23 collection 23 is $137,595.90.
Let's go first. Of course I do. Same charts as before. This is the map of the county. The highlighted red area is the Chardon School District. Curiously enough, they had the lowest combined res ag combination increase due to the reval at 26.4%. Not sure why that anomaly occurred, but that's what the math produced. There are a couple of notches you'll see at the top of their district, which are occupied by adjacent districts in Lake County. There's a Madison, a Riverside, and a Kirtland district that all bounce into Geauga, and those are carved out. Similar to the previous set of slides, you can see where the school district aligns with their assessed value. They're at $955 million of total value. Their experienced increase due to the reval is almost $184 million. It's the third highest, right in the middle of the pack of all the districts. When you look at their ranking, again, from a rate perspective, the far left-hand side is full rate. The right-hand side is effective rate, and then also the floor adjustment on the far right. You can see that Chardon is running approximately third in full rate at 80.68 mils, but when you convert that to today's money, they run fourth at 50 and some change. They're sitting at a total of 28 mils when compared to the floor adjustments, which again only include inside millage and current expenses. We carve out PI transfers from inside millage. That's not counted in the floor calculation, and we don't count any other levies on the right side. Okay, they experienced a 0.8% average revenue increase due to new construction. They also experienced a 26 and some change average revenue increase in their inside millage, totaling about $827,000. There was no 20 mil floor adjustment revenue provided to the Chardon school system, and tax equalization protected their levy collection. So even though their effective tax rate was reduced because the assessed value went up, the math stayed equal, and therefore they lost no revenue due to equalization. If you, again, you've seen this chart now 3 times. The 3 contributors who benefited from the inside millage increase due to reval were the county, townships and munis and schools. 87% of the counties was remitted, 65% of the townships and munis were remitted, and 9% of the schools only by West G. So 87% of the total valuation increase of inside millage increase and floor adjustment went to school districts. When you look at school revenue effect and where it falls, you can see that the previous value of inside millage was about $3,462,000. The new value is at $4,289,000, which is an increase of $827,000 due to the reval. They had no effect of the floor adjustment. Therefore, the only increase they received was from the inside millage. This is a chart of their enrollment. Similar to the other districts we've looked at, they're seeing a declining enrollment numbers. This is from the state, Ohio Department of Education. You can see they're down about 4.5% over 4 years, which is 123 students, which I guess is not as bad as some, but it's still a cause for concern. Looking at their cash as a percent of expenses. The blue line is their particular percentage of cash as a percentage of expense. The red line is the county's overall average of all school districts in the county, and the green line is the state for all schools. You can see that somewhere around 2019, Chardon School crossed the average line and became positive. Their cash started accruing a bit more money as a cash as a percent of expense. However, you'll see that last year the reporting is down well over 13% from previous years. And then we'll go into the next chart of how that's going to be affected for the budget prediction for this year. Again, we took their new certified values that are being proposed here today, and we recranked their numbers for a new ending balance of 17. And just so that I have the number, they were sitting at 60.9% cash to expenses. The new calculation drops them to 39.3, which is below the state average. Well, we don't know what the new state average will be. The old state average was 44 and some change, so we don't know if the overall average will change. Their general fund revenue per student is running just a little bit south of $15,000 per student, and their expenses are running according to their budget at 17,000 and some change per student. So by far, they're spending more money on their students than they're getting in revenue. Their cash carryover per student, however, is running at 6,745. This is based on their budget submission. If we look at all funds, not just the general fund, and we recrank those same numbers, it changes the perspective a little bit. It actually reduces their percent cash, so they're burning more money, even more money out of non-general fund funds, which probably indicates more PI funding, more long-term investment. That's how I'm reading these numbers. Their total revenue per student is at $19,000, so taking into account all funding, and their expense is $22,000, so it's significantly higher. Again, if you're investing in capital or in long-term PI type things, you're going to increase the cost per student. And then the total carryover per student is going to end up roughly at $8,000 per student with all cash balance considered. The third chart, block of charts over, the third grouping, that's Chardon when compared to the first two that we've already looked at. You can see they're actually the lowest revenue per student funded school district in the county. Again, I'm not indicating any indicator of what that means. It's just the facts of the matter of the math. They're also, their delta, I looked at their delta between the green bar and the blue bar, and that delta is the highest. So their cost per student is by far greater than their revenue per student as it relates to the other districts, which would indicate to me, based on what I read in your executive summary, you're investing in capital, you're investing in structure. And so that would drive that number accordingly. Their cost, their dollars per student as a percent of cash, a percent of expenses is running in the middle of the pack. Very similar to that of Cardinal with a lot more students. So if you look at their 2024-2025 budget, general fund cash as a percent of expense compared to the other schools, you can see they're running second in the pack, but I would say they're more of the average. If you take the high and the low and throw them away, they're running pretty much in the pack, which is not unexpected. Comments. So again, putting in perspective, they have a somewhat high millage, total millage collection. However, you have to convert that to effective mills. They have a lot of old levies. They're running inside millage, 3.5 mills is going into the general fund, 1 mill is going to permanent improvement. That's not a cause of concern because they're well above the floor. They have 10 current expense levies at 74 and some change mills, 1 permanent improvement levy at 2 mills, and they're not at the 20 mill floor, running it over 28 mills when calculating it using the 20 mill floor adjustment. They did provide a very comprehensive executive summary, which summary is a generous word for it. It was, 20 pages long, 25 pages long. I guess there are some areas in that summary which actually, for me, raised more questions than gave answers to, which I guess I would prefer an executive summary that answered my questions rather than gave me more to ask, but it is what it is. The questions that I have generally revolve around relevance of some data in that executive summary, which I guess I can't put my hands on. There was reference, for example, to a 2014 request for an advance that was not allowed. That's 10 years ago. I guess I failed to see the significant contributor to this budget of that event or anomaly, but that was more, I appreciate the history, but I don't know what that's telling me today. Again, if you have any comments about it, that's fine, but I just didn't see value in it. The other thing that I did notice that I think is a tendency for all of us to do that I would like to see different in the executive summary is, you can paint numbers a lot of ways. They always say, that you can take any statistic and make anything out of it. You really can. And clearly, I think one that jumped out at me the most is, I think when talking about wages, you ranked Chardon as third from the bottom in wage, but there's only there's only 5 school districts in the county. So third at the bottom would be third from the top, right? It's basically the middle. And so, you know, I guess, you know, it's the old argument, is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? I don't know, it's in the middle. A math person says it's in the middle. I guess you try to avoid making opinion out of the statistic. And so I tried to clean out of that executive summary what was opinion versus what was fact. The one thing that I did have question on that was significant to me was you indicated that you had lost 1.1, I believe the number was $1.1 million in utility revenue in 2023. Was that due to a pipeline?
Yeah, it was just the non-payment. We got it back in 24, which I also stated.
Right, so you didn't lose it, you just didn't get it in 23.
Right, but we didn't have it.
I understand it. But when you use a phrase like we lost that revenue, I think it's important to say, but we received it a year later.
And I did.
Right, but the takeaway that I read was, you know, this was punitive, or this was the anomaly that caused some catastrophic loss. And in the reality is it just shifted a year. So I think those kind of, again, I'm more of just give me the numbers. Don't give me don't try to position it in my head. I'd rather do that by staring at the numbers and determining what are the anomalies that are occurring. When you try to steer me, I personally get resistant because I don't want to be pushed. I want to go there on my own. And so in some ways it hurts your argument because I'm pushing back before I've even given it a chance to evaluate. And that's just my comment. It doesn't mean, it means nothing about your submission. I don't have a real issue with your submission, but that's my takeaway from it. Okay, cheers. Or whoever.
Yeah, I guess I really didn't understand the point of this. It was, if this was supposed to make our jobs easier, it didn't. I felt like you just tried to paper me to death to hide the ball. I mean, what I didn't get from here is, you know, last year I made a passing concern about your extremely high cash balances. And I was ridiculed and attacked about it for several weeks. And, but looks like you actually followed my advice and you're starting to spend it down. So I'll take that as the apology. But I guess what I'm looking at here is, you know, you've come up with another $6 million in expenses. And this giant thing you get, what are you spending the extra $6 million on? Because you don't provide budget detail. You provide a lot of, you know, there's some pot shots in here. There's some accusations. You know, you've got this bus garage project. This looks like this is your submission to the state Senate for state funding. So is that budgeted, or are you just threw in there what you asked the legislature for?
There's 50% budgeted and 50% asked for the legislature.
So if the legislature does not give you that money,
And it says in there, if they do not give us the money, then I'm going to have to go back to the board for the other 50%.
okay, so $3.5 million of this $6 million may not occur.
No, it's going to occur. We're still going to do a phase-in process. We'd like to complete it all, but we're still going to start phasing it in. We bought the building. We are starting that project. Yeah.
I understand you bought the building, but I guess my question is, are you telling us right now you're spending the $3.5 million no matter what?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's part of the $6 million. What's the rest? What are the other increases due to?
The other increases, which the executive summary starts what you asked me for last year. I was trying to explain the plan. That's what I gave you, that plan, a tech plan. You know, last year it was the 5-year forecast. I just wanted to give you a plan of where all the money goes. There's several things detailed in there. We did reduce fees for all students. So we increased our supplies to account for that. So that's part of the 6 million. There's, of course, salaries like all the other districts. We're 80% in salaries and benefits, so there's an increase built in for salaries.
Well, what you have the 1.6 million that you're doing for buyouts, so that your salary numbers actually get driven down.
Over 8 years' time, but not in the next 2 years.
So where's that, when was that funded? Is the 1.6, that's the other, again, I'm not getting the detail, I'm getting, so the 1.6 million, is that over 8 years? Or did you fund that up front and it's going to provide you the savings
Yeah,
over 8
the
years?
executive summary, 2 years, 1 million in the first year, the 600,000 in the.
When's the million? Next year or
No,
the
the
current year?
million was in the first year. This year is 600,000.
Okay, so 600,000 is in this budget that you've submitted for the buyouts, and then you're
Right.
done with that.
Then we're done with that, yes.
Okay,
And it will be a savings over 8 year time, which I did detail in the executive summary.
okay, so what other projects are you completing?
There were, there's actually a huge list of projects, but in the general fund you're asking,
Well, look, again, I want to get away from the 5-year forecast because I put zero stock in. I mean, I would love to know if in 2019, your 5-year forecast indicated that your cash balances would increase by over 10 million. I doubt it. I doubt the 5-year forecast said that. So I really don't care about the 5-year forecast. What I really want to focus on is this budget and what you're doing to drive down, because, you know, you're approaching all funds, you were hitting 30 million, right?
right, no, correct.
So I think the concern I expressed last year, which it looks like you're doing, you're saying you're gonna, but I wanna pin you down on exactly what's you're spending the money on, so that when we're back here next year, we're gonna see if you spent the money.
Right, and you do on capital outlay, and that's where most of it is. There is some increase in purchase services. We did experience inflation in both supplies and purchase services. But the capital outlay is where most of it is.
Okay.
We also had Promethean boards. We're spending $900,000 in Promethean boards. We're updating all technology in all the school buildings. So that was another additional cost. It's a bunch of things.
So is there another large capital project other than the bus garage?
Windows, we're seeing about 350,000 in Windows.
The windows is in the PI though, the windows, in the general fund, it's typically I think the bus garage. We have another one that's not in there yet that we're thinking about adding, is a board decision.
What is that?
A possible concession stand at the stadium restroom project.
But that's not in this budget.
That's not in this, yeah.
But you have cash for it. You have cash for almost anything you want.
That's useful.
Deb, you do a very good job of presenting on behalf of the board. You're sitting on $23 million that we know about. And for this current fiscal year, your estimate was $29 million cash. And is it going to be actually more than that, do you think? Look in your crystal ball.
I try to make as much revenue. We try to get as many grants. We've sold.
I understand that, but do you think it'll be more than $29 million?
Possibly.
So my thinking is, Mike, was there ever a discussion with your board to give that $800,000 back to the taxpayers?
There was a discussion, yes.
And you chose not, the board chose not to.
There was, that's correct. I mean, you reflected it on, Mr. Walder reflected it on the chart, or on the graphic that you showed.
So I've not looked at your investment reports, but I'm guessing you're making over $1 million a year in interest alone, which is to your benefit and to the school's benefit. But here comes this $800,000 that the voters had nothing to do with, but yet they have to pay for it, I think it would have been an item of good faith to say, you know what? The interest rate environment is so lucrative for all of us, including the county. We all benefit from that. We all benefit from it personally and professionally. At 800 grand, you could have said, you know what? Let's give that back to the taxpayer. But clearly, the school, and I'm not picking on you, I'm picking on almost all of the schools, they chose, holy cow, I'm taking that money off the table. That's ours. Wait a minute, the voters had no say, but they got to pony up. And we are just finishing tax collection, which went extremely well. We are so blessed to be in a wealthy county. People pay their taxes with fervor. This was a more difficult year, or this was a more difficult tax collection. And there will be some unfortunate results. People will end up, we're going to work to make it so they don't lose their homes. But some people will move because they can no longer afford the tax. Mr. Flays and I work closely together. We do not want a single person to lose their home because of the taxes. Unfortunately, it's going to happen. That simple 800 grand could have been a wonderful way of telling the taxpayers, hey, we understand what's going on. We're making a lot of money in interest. We could forego that. Let me continue for one brief moment. Deb, you've got that blue and black sheet.
Yes, sir.
If you look at the far right column for the general fund, 2024-25, you have estimated expense of $45 million. That's 23% in 1 year. Some of that's the bus garage. Some of that is new monitors being replaced and other stuff. I'm not sure anybody in the county got a 23% raise unless they own the business and they had a, booming year. I believe a 23% increase in anything is wrong. Now, your testimony here is that, taxpayer money is going to be spent as we advised you last year. So the new bus garage is going to happen no matter what. And if the state doesn't pony up half, you're going to pay for it out of your existing resources. I think the better course would be for the voters to be asked, would you like to pay for a new bus garage? As opposed to, hey, we got all this money. We're going to pay for a new bus garage. If the state won't pony up, we're going to pay for it ourselves. That's about $6 million that could have gone out of your cash surplus of $29 million. I believe the taxpayers are getting the short end of the stick in a major way, and I'm very concerned. And I will not approve a budget come next year that has an inordinate cash balance. I have nothing further.
Yes, so I'm looking at your statement of fund activity on what you submitted. So this is just kind of to illustrate, and this is where I'm having a hard time putting my finger on exactly where all this money's going. Clearly you got the message we were going to take the money away, at least I was last year, if something didn't change. So now you're telling us a lot of stuff is going to change, and I could wait and see if that actually happens, but revenue over expenditures. So you were running in your general fund revenue over expenditures. You were running a $4.7 million surplus in 2022. That's your actual $4.7 million surplus. Now you're estimating in 2025. So from 2022 to 2025, now you're estimating next year a $5 million deficit. That's almost a $10 million swing. Where is all that money going?
I detailed that 10 million for you in the plan that I submitted. I did a crossover that showed you exactly what I submitted last year. And I broke it down by each category, sir, so that you could see exactly where the changes were. And they're in a lot of the things that we just discussed. They're in salaries, they're in inflation, they're in capital improvements that we've added, Promethean boards, network upgrades.
So
The PI move also is a big part of it.
this is what I want to pin down because this is going to matter to me next year. You've submitted a request for one-time funding from the state because they're doing this funding. I don't know what's going to happen with that. My guess, hearing what I'm hearing in Columbus, is that, you know, the Senate president wants to be Speaker of the House next year, and the current Speaker of the House wants to be Speaker of the House next year. So this whole thing of divvying up this giant pot of money that the state has and handing it out before Election Day, it's not going well in the state legislature. So I don't know what's going to happen. But you've got a total project estimate of $8.2 million. The pool's prepared to match at 4.1. So you've indicated, you've told us that, so 3.5 million is in this budget, your budget. You said your budget assumes you're going to get that money. Is that fair to say?
No, it's in hopes. We're going to phase in.
Well, you budgeted the local match in your budget, right?
Right, correct.
Okay. So 3.5 million out of the general fund, and then is the extra 600,000 out of the PI fund?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we already have, yeah, we're working in, because there's other things, it's not just a transportation compound. It's the security vestibule in the front of the high school. It's a security vestibule in the back of the high school. It's a student parking. It addresses security.
Yeah, the bus garage is just, according to your 7.1 million of the 8.2 million. Again, we can't judge, or we shouldn't be looking at your expense. I mean, the fact that you were sitting on 29 million and you haven't addressed the security vestibule, that's not your problem. But the fact that, I mean, in today's the 12th year anniversary, you've had that security vestibule for 12 years and you had $29 million and you didn't fix it. That's really disappointing to me. And that's putting it very nicely. So now you aren't spending this money. So you've got the 7.1 million for the bus garage and then an additional 1.1 million for these other projects, which frankly should have done a long time ago. You've budgeted the local match. If you don't get the state funding, are you going to spend this money?
Yes.
Okay, I'm holding you to that next year.
No, it says-
Because if you don't spend the $4.1 million, I'm going to vote to reduce your levy collections. I'm telling you that right now. So I better see follow through on the projects. I cannot be any more crystal clear. Frankly, I think I should vote to take away some money this year. But you did acquire the property. You sold other property. I think you have a really good plan. And you have at least demonstrated a need for this money in this budget cycle. But it worries me that a big chunk of your, because if you didn't have that $4.1 million budgeted, I think it'd be a pretty easy decision to reduce your levy collection based upon your giant cash balance. So I'm going to take you for your word here, and I'm not going to vote to reduce your collection, your revenue collection. But I will next year. So I just want to be clear. That's where I'm at.
So if you refer to this sheet, we call it the Hitchcock sheet, nobody wants to take ownership, so we give it to him. And I'm looking at your permanent improvement fund, and I think maybe here's something that you may want to consider. It looks to me, in looking at these numbers, starting in 2020 and 2021 year, it seems like the ability of properly budgeting revenue like disappeared. Prior to that time, the budget was right on target. I mean, revenue to actual prediction was there. The expense to actual expense was there. Then you got to 2021 and the estimate revenue was 1.3 million. The actual was 5.1.
Yes.
Could be an anomaly, I get it.
We took out a TAN loan that we weren't anticipating, so it was 3.75 million.
Okay. Then the next year, estimated 980, you got 1.1. The next year, you estimated 991, you got 1.4. And then if you, look the, you know, when you look at the compounding effect of that, your ending balances start to go crazy because
We sold 3 properties in 3 years, which is unusual.
I understand that, but you have to understand, we're just looking at numbers.
Mhm.
You're predicting what, I'm assuming that was predicted at some point. We're going to sell this building. Maybe we should budget for revenue. You know, and then if we have expenses, we can bring them in. And then if it gets moved a year because the purchase didn't happen, the expense gets moved. But the balance remains the same. When you get into this swinging back and forth, that's when I think these numbers don't tell the story to the taxpayer. And at the end of the day, you know, you're predicting this year only $33,000 left as an ending balance in the PI fund. Do you think that's factual? The end of this year, that PI fund's going to drop to $33,000.
Yeah, we have more projects than we have money in our PI.
I get that, but you have to do them in order to burn the money. You can't just have them. You have to do them.
Right.
And so, again, that's where I think the break between us and the state relies on a 5-year plan from you because it's a requirement. We don't have a 5-year plan requirement. We encourage them, but we can only look at 1 year out. That's what the law says. We cannot really factor in 5 years because the logic here is taxpayers shouldn't be prepaying for something well into the future. That's an obligation that those people should be paying for. So I guess I hope that the numbers do fall out to be true, but I'm worried that you'll have considerably more in that PI fund than $33,000. That's my worry, but I could be wrong and we'll find out in a year.
I guess, why'd you take out a loan in 21 when you were sitting on $24 million in cash in your general fund? Why would you be taking out loans?
We got the loan for 1.62%. So, yeah,
So what? Did you have a cash need? Just because money's cheap, that doesn't encourage a person to go out and borrow money unless they're going to buy on margin. Then you run into trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll move to approve.
I think it's my opportunity to offer a second, but it is done with great concern for the way the taxpayers are being abused. It has got to stop, and it will stop come next year. Trust me.
With that, before we take the vote, we should open up for public comment, both online. You can stop sharing the thing if you don't mind, and from the audience. If anybody has any comments or questions.
We have one message.
And if you have a question, in these states are name and address, just for the record.
I'm Madeline Horvath. I live at 111 Winewood Place in Chardon. I have a couple things, not a question. First of all, that 2014 request that you wondered about, that's when I started on the school board. And the reason we made that request was because we were afraid we would not make the payroll that year because we had had 5 tries at a levy that finally had passed in 2013. That's the explanation to that. Also, I would like to say that for schools, the state budget changes on us every 2 years. So they require us to create the 5-year forecast. You guys request something different, which is That's the way schools have to jump through hoops these days. I would also like to state that the state gives $7,300 per student per year to many schools, not to us. We get about $1,663 per student per year. The state has also seen fit to give voucher payments of $8,400 per student per year this year. So I think that our public schools are having to deal with a lot of different hoops that they have to jump through. I think the last levy Chardon put on, and I'm not certain, but I think it was 2016. And one of the main reasons we try to keep money in our budget and in our coffers is to try to avoid levies. Levies are expensive, time-consuming, and unpopular. They take a huge amount of time from the superintendent, the treasurer, the board members, and members of the community who volunteer. That money for levies has to totally be raised outside of what the schools have. It's not funded by the schools. And the last thing I'd like to say is House Bill 920 keeps schools at an inflation-proof thing. So we cannot deal with the costs of inflation because of House Bill 920. Our revenues stay pretty flat. And the only thing that helps is this reevaluation that has regularly occurred for every, 6 years, I believe it is. That is a little bit of a hedge on inflation. But one of the very few things we have. The last thing I'd like to say is that I know that your job is to deal with money and taxpayers and blue lines and black lines. Somebody has to think about our kids. To me, if I have to pay another $100 a year in taxes for the kids who are our future and who all these school people are trying to help, then I think that's a fair deal. And that's what I would like to say.
Good. I just want, and I'm not picking on you because I hear it's about the kids, okay? We're not the ones who are charged with spending money on the kids. A couple of them are sitting right here,
Yes.
okay? They were sitting, let me ask you a question. Do you think it was fair to the Chardon taxpayers that they were sitting on $29 million in cash last year? And do you think that?
Because the state can change our income anytime. And the cost to do a levy to raise the funds, that's what we're trying to hedge against.
But let's talk about.
And in 2014, we were close to not making payroll. We had cut bus expenses, we had cut classes, we had not done any maintenance in years. And then what happens is the taxpayers come back and say, you didn't fix that, shame on you. Well, it's because they didn't have the money.
But we're not taking money away from kids. The school boards aren't spending the money they have on the kids, and it's gotten out of control.
That's not.
Well, that's the
not the
truth.
way I look
It's a
at it.
$29 million.
Not the way-
Let me just go over numbers with you because you're talking about levies, and I don't want to. I don't want people to feel like they're commenting and I'm going to attack them, but I want to be factual. So let's look at the last levy. There was a 2018 Chardon 3.9 mil current expense levy. It was authorized by the voters on May 8th, 2018. Okay. And that brings in at 95, let's do 100%. At 100% collection, that levy that was authorized in May of 2018 brings in $2.7 million a year. In 2018, the Chardon Schools cash carryover in the general fund was 9.7 million. Last year, it was 28 million. Do you think that it was right to take that $2.7 million from taxpayers since 2018 when that cash carryover more than doubled in that time while they were collecting that levy?
Excuse me, Mr. Plaza, I don't know where our cash balance was ever, 28 million. That was an estimate from a year ago. It was 23,813.
But I think your actual, oh, I'm sorry, 28 was your all funds. I'm sorry, your general fund was 24 million. Okay, so you went from 9.7 million when you asked the voters to authorize the levy. Your cash carryover was 9.7 million. And you started collecting $2.7 million from the voters every year, 2018. And then by the end of 23, you had $24 million in cash in the general fund. Is that fact? That's fact, right? So I guess my issue is it was wrong to take that $2.7 million from the taxpayers all those years because all you did was throw it in the bank. It wasn't, not a nickel of it was spent on a student.
Oh, I totally disagree with that.
Well, these are the numbers.
That
Am I
really
wrong?
disagree with that.
Could I ask a question?
It was balanced.
How many levies have been placed on the ballot that started in the last 5 years?
Yeah.
And how many passed?
The bond issue.
So zero.
They're just bond issues, no levies, no operating
Well,
levies.
but they're still
since
levies.
2018.
Yeah.
2 bond issues and they both failed.
Okay, so clearly the taxpayers, though, have a little different perspective.
Which is why we need to keep some money in the bank to protect our ability.
If you could let me finish my statement, I think, we gave you the opportunity, and I think there's people that aren't being represented here that have raised concern, and they've done it at the ballot box. If everyone just believed we should just trust in somebody else to just do the right thing for us, then we wouldn't need election. We would need to bring it to the voters. The fact of the matter is, if there was an unlimited pocket to throw as much money in as somebody else decides is reasonable, then why bring any issues to the ballot? Just keep accumulating as much as you want until, with no checks and balance. But the reality, though, is there is a mechanism of test and check and balance. And some people don't like it, and I appreciate that you don't like it because schools do have bad funding. It's unconstitutional. It's been that way for 35, 40 years. We're not going to fix that. The reality, though, is you can't just ignore the voters' concern with being taxed out of their homes. And everyone can minimize what it costs. Oh, it's only $100. If it's $100 to save the children, then that's what it's all about. If everybody took that position without the vote of the people, we would all have to go live somewhere else because fire districts say the same thing. Police departments say the same thing. Local governments say the same thing. I have yet to see a township, a city, or a village come before us that don't say they need more money. They all need more money. What they have to do is they have to go to the voters and convince them. So my argument to you is, if you want to do an initiative that you don't have money to do, which is not the case here, but if you do, just ask the voters. And if you do it and they believe you, they will give you the money. If they don't, they will vote no. That's what this system is all about. Our job is to keep it in check and balance. That's our job. It's not to just look the other way and just let it run on its own accord. It's just not.
I think this last thing I'll say, our track record on levies speaks for itself in Chardon.
I think it
And there is
does.
a very good reason why our school district needs to keep some cash balance to keep paying the bills. And yes, it does.
Here's the thing I'm objecting to. This is not about you just paying your bills. You have almost $30 million in the bank. You have paid your bills and then you have 30 million left over. Everyone wants to make this an emotional argument that we're not helping the children. We're not paying our bills. In fact, you're doing both. You are helping your children. You are paying your bills. The question is 30 million too much to have in reserve? That's the only question at hand here. We had a meeting where we talked about this increase in inside millage, and the lawyers came to the meeting, paid for by taxpayers, to argue it's all about mental health for the children. If you need more mental health for children, you've got tens of thousands of dollars you have millions of dollars to spend on it. That's not the issue debating here. The issue is how much is too much? That's the question. And you may have one opinion and somebody else living next to you with a home saying, I can't afford it. And we're gonna have to agree to disagree on those terms. But the reality is you can't just ignore their voice because they don't want to come and say, I think it's too much. But they have reached out to us independently and said, it's out of control. So we have a responsibility to do our due diligence. And that's all we're doing. Asking questions about a school is legitimate and it's honest. I think when you see pushback, like we don't deserve to be asked, that's when you have to keep peeling back the
I'm
onion.
not saying that we don't deserve to be asked.
I'm
All
saying-
I'm saying is there's a reason for having extra funds. It has to do with state funding and the fact that Chardon does not want to pass levies, and that is historical. Back when you were saying that the cash balance was equal all the time and about the same, that's when we were struggling to pay bills. And I can remember it because I lived it.
I talked about the cash balance in the PI fund, and that was 2020, 2021. That, I have lots of
We
cash.
talked about the tax, I don't know, in this blue.
Maybe we'll agree to disagree on that.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is the last levy the voters approved in 2018, which brings in $2.7 million a year, the school did not need any of that money. Their cash balances still would have increased if they didn't collect $1 of that last levy that was approved. That's just a fact. It's a fact. So
Disagree.
And
I'll give you the numbers. It's not opinion. If you take away $2.7 million a year from 2018 moving forward, their cash balance still would have increased. That is a fact.
any other questions by the audience, questions or comments?
I have a comment.
Yes.
Stand up here so I don't have to yell. Please state your name and address. My name is Gabrielle Moose. I live at 11110 River Road in Chardon, lifelong resident of Chardon, graduate of Chardon High School, and I have 3 children in the Chardon schools today. As I listen to today's presentation and discussion of budgeting in Chardon local schools, I'm struck by the stark disparity between the building I'm in right now and the buildings my 3 children are sitting in Chardon local schools. Right. I was struck by the fact that you chose to comment on the fact that voters were not able to vote on the most recent tax increase and therefore concluded those dollars should be returned to the taxpayers. I don't recall getting to vote on whether this building was built. I certainly would not have voted in favor of it if I had been asked. I don't recall you considering returning that money to the taxpayers before you built these buildings. I would have voted in favor of that had I been asked. I take issue with the fact that you throw stones from this glass house. You've all heard it said, the measure of a society is how it treats its weakest members. On a more granular level and closest to home, this is certainly true of how our community treats its children. While our children receive a quality education at Chardon, it can certainly be described as no frills. During the many levy campaigns I've co-chaired, I've personally knocked on hundreds of doors and dialed hundreds of phone numbers and repeatedly heard the same message from community members. The school district needs to live within their means. I believe our board and administrators do just that. They stretch our dollars to give the kids the best possible education they have with what they have to work with. They took extraordinary measures to close buildings and combine school buildings after the difficulty in passing the last levy in order to be fiscally responsible. After the failure of the most recent bond campaign, the district began the process of repairing schools that a state commission said would have been more cost effective to replace than repair. The buildings that house our children today were built before most of the jobs they will have even existed. However, the district is now tasked with making these buildings last at least another generation. Careful planning and budgeting has left the district in a solid financial position that you all take issue with and allowed them to space out the time between requests for additional operating levies. This is communicated transparently in the annual updates to the community as well as at monthly board meetings. Yet you cast aspersions on the work that these fine people do. The district has consistently communicated that they anticipate the need for another operating levy in 2027 or 2028. In recent years, it's taken so long to get the community to see the need for additional funding for our schools. Extreme cuts had to be made while waiting for the community to catch up. Instead of waiting for our children to suffer, the district has planned accordingly and budgeted realistically. This is why I was so shocked to receive a letter from the county commissioners stating that my property taxes were increasing, and that they were urging schools to forego the increase in revenue the revaluation would provide. This smacks of trying to score political points on the backs of our children. You all talked about emotion. That's exactly what's going on here. It does not sit well with this parent, and I suspect most others feel the same way. For Chardon schools, the increase represents a minuscule portion of their annual revenue. We've all seen the rising costs at the gas pump in the grocery store, in our energy costs. The list could go on and on. The school district is not immune from this, yet they must still prepare our students to be successful. While I don't necessarily enjoy paying taxes, and I certainly didn't celebrate seeing a tax increase, I urge this group to look elsewhere as you try to ease the burden on taxpayers. I'm not suggesting we provide our students with a beautiful Taj Mahal or that we add underwater basket weaving classes. I simply ask that we don't begrudge providing what is necessary to keep them safe, warm, dry, and educated. This is especially poignant as I sent my son to Chardon High School on the anniversary of a day that this community wishes had never happened, but will never forget. We need to come together as a community and support and protect these members of the community who rely on us completely. And you talked a lot about facts, and I think you didn't let Deb, you kind of mocked what she put together, but this is what you've asked of them. You've asked of them to justify the balance that they have on hand, the cash balance, which is about a year's worth of operating revenue. How much money do you have in your bank account? I don't sit on 2 or 3 months worth of expenses for my family in case something catastrophic happens. Did you walk through Chardon High School when the floods were coming down through the hallways and the students were being housed behind the bleachers in classes for months? They have no choice but to be responsible and keep cash on hand for these things that we can't always predict. Just as we keep savings on hand in our households, the district needs to do the same. It would be irresponsible to do otherwise. I really urge you to look elsewhere to ease the burden on our taxpayers.
Well, I'll start out first. I'm not out of this office. I don't work out of this office. Wasn't asked, should we build this building? I'm a county auditor. I'm downtown.
Where were you in auditing whether
Could you
this
please
building?
give me a chance to respond? My office is downtown in a 175-year-old building with 1 bathroom shared by 12 employees that hasn't been remodeled in decades. I'm not in a Taj Mahal, nor do I want one. However, the decision to build this building and to use the money they use the building is outside of the realm of this board. This board has no control over the decision whether to build this building or not. And I personally resent being characterized as coming out of this building. I don't have an office in this building. None of us do.
I would say
So-
characterizing our school district as
Well,
being
I don't want this to turn into a you spoke, I spoke, you spoke, I spoke. We gave you all of the time you asked for. You read a statement that you obviously had prepared or were preparing while we were having the meeting. And now we get a chance to comment on it.
Yes.
You also said, all of this should be built because we are casting aspersions on people. This is not casting any aspersions on anyone. This is taxpayer money. This isn't your money. This isn't the school's money. This is the taxpayers' money. We don't get to decide what we are allowed to do. The law tells us what we are allowed to do. And we are victims, we are subject to statute. The statute does have limitations to how much money a person can hold if they're a government entity. And it's not about in the event of a catastrophic failure. It's not about that. It's about what the law permits. And to just look the other way and say, well, in this particular scenario, it's okay for Chardon to hold 30 million and it's okay to see Kenston with 7 million. How do you wash that? So everyone should get more money at the expense of everyone else. Every township should have as much money as they think they need because they have buildings, they have road trucks that plow your roads, they have fire companies that put out a fire and go on emergency calls. They should have infinite reserves just in case. And we should all not be here calling them out when they have too much money in the bank. I don't buy that. I don't buy that that's what the government is set up to do. I believe our job is to be reasonable and to require accountability at all levels. Just as you said, we are challenging the submission. That is our job. We do that with our students every day when they go to school. We challenge them. We challenge them to question everything. We don't just say, here's what you're going to believe. We give them this way and that way and let them use their intellect to choose the way they wish to think. So I just don't like to be thrown in a bucket like I made a decision to build this Taj Mahal and then I'm challenging Chardon for holding 30 million. Because first of all, they're not building a building. If they decided to build a building, that's their decision to make. So I agree with you in this regard. I think this building should have been built by a vote of the people. I agree with you. That's not my authority though. I'm not a county commissioner. Those guys are right down the hall. And I would encourage you to go in there and tell them that you're disappointed they didn't bring this to a vote, because I would be there with you. But to say they did it, therefore it's okay for everyone else to do it, is equally harming. And I don't want to be part of that.
I will tell you now that we're not in a glass house. We haven't taken a nickel away from the school districts yet. We haven't. We have not reduced their levy collections. We have reduced county levy collections, this board, by millions of dollars. And I'm sure Chuck could pull up the numbers, but the county, at our strong urging, we appeared and had a special meeting in front of the commissioners. They reduced the inside millage windfall by over $2 million. They cut the children's services levies.
The children's services levy.
Then they gave them the money from the general fund.
Again, if you're gonna say that we're not holding other people accountable or we're not, or we're treating the schools differently, I suggest you look at all our meeting minutes or start attending our meetings. They're all broadcast online.
Today, and I hope I can speak now, you know, from what I saw today is that you were prepared a detailed report and you kind of mocked that report, in my opinion, from what I saw and said, you know, why did you throw all this information at us? Well, that was an attempt to explain why the cash reserve is not out of balance with what the district needs. And yet you kind of cast that aside. And you mentioned that I had my remarks prepared. It seems that you came into this meeting prepared and with your mind made up and, you know, wanting to make a splash about, you know, giving money back to the taxpayers without really wanting to hear what the district plans to do with it and what their needs are. And then when they do tell you what they're going to do with it, you kind of argue with them, well, if that's really true, if that's really true. So it's also, you know, yes, question away. But when you hear the answers and you have no reason to think that these people are not giving you the truthful answers, and I resent the fact that you're making it seem that there is a reason to doubt it. It's this, there's a lot of mistrust between the public and the school district.
A year ago, Chardon came to us with a budget and we had similar conversations. After their budget submission, they then produced a second budget with more money to be spent. And their argument was basically a House bill that had yet to pass. They included in their budget submission what would happen to schools if House Bill 187 passed. What if tomorrow a tornado takes this building out? The likelihood of House Bill 187 passing is the same as a tornado taking out this building. So you have to question legitimacy of data that's presented. To just sit there and say, oh, yeah, we got data.
And then you also need to review the data and look. I mean, I sat here and watched you say it. You gave me other, and I don't want to hear, you know, your reasoning. I just want to look at the numbers.
That's not what I said. I don't want to hear the opinion. I don't want to hear context like
You
this.
don't want to hear the opinion of the experts that are in the room. They are experts in school funding and spending the money for our district.
I don't understand the significance of this sentence. Then in 2014, now we're in 2024, 2025 budget cycle. So now we're talking in 2014, after an operating levy finally passed, the district requested an advance to cover payroll from the Geauga County Treasurer Hitchcock, who denied the request. Oh, it's Chris's fault. It's Chris's fault.
You're just taking this too personally. This is about.
What is the relevance of a 10-year-old request that was denied when you're sitting on $30 million now?
They're giving.
What's the
history
relevance?
As to why they need to keep a cash balance so that they can cover payroll. They have a year's worth of the annual operating.
And the state average is only 44%. But they need a year. They need 100%.
And I think it's less than a year now, because what is it, 23 million a year?
It's not, it'll be,
Probably 8, 9 months. Again, this is how we would run a household. We would be saying the opposite if they didn't have enough.
but
cash.
the household is
They
paid
were
for,
spending willy-nilly.
your household revenue is paid for by your work. This is the work of a bunch of taxpayers giving money.
I'm a taxpayer.
I don't know many households that have in savings the amount of their combined household income in their savings. I would, what percentage of households in this county have in savings the amount of money that they earn in a year?
It's not even irrelevant.
But I'm just saying that
It's not a year, because what's your annual budget?
we were getting there. It was a year.
About 160.
160.
Are there,
Yeah.
this isn't a conversation, this is a hearing. Is there anybody else that has a question or a statement they would like to provide? If you would stand and identify yourself?
My name is Guy Wilson, Hamden Township. I'm on Sheldon Windsor Road. I was a board member for 12 years. And I was a board member on this very day that Mr. Flays referenced in 2012. I don't have much to add to what was said. I'm listening to the dialogue. I'm listening to what you're saying. I'm listening to what the district is saying. I'm no longer a board member, so I don't have any skin in the game necessarily. I don't have any kids in the school. But one thing I think is obvious, and I think you two agree on, is we're beginning to spend that cash balance. We recognize the input. And the district is beginning to make significant investments in all sorts of things, which is great. I do take exception to the idea that we can just go and pass levies and things. When I started with the school and I started helping with the school back in actually 2008, 2009, we were decimated by state cuts and other things. And that continued through into the early teens, to the point where we couldn't make payroll. We cut our curriculum down to almost bare minimum. And even with that, with a glaring need, it took 6 tries to pass a levy. 6 tries. It's very difficult to pass a levy in Chardon when it comes to schools. It's very easy to pass a library levy or library bond. The library went ahead without even any plans and passed a bond issue unanimously. Probably because there are dynamics at play with the population looking at schools versus a library. But I think you've got to be very careful making statements about you should have fixed this 12 years ago when we had security issues, because we really have only recently gotten to this point of a high cash balance and being able to do some of the things we're doing. And we are building a plan and we're executing that plan. There's multiple, but it's going to take multiple years to do some of it because you can't do all of it at once. That's all I really have to say. I think we heard what was said last year. We're working on that, but I think we are experiencing some of the outcomes of House Bill 920 and the unconstitutional way that the schools are funded by the state, when they're very, very willing to just give billions of dollars away to private schools before they'll fully fund constitutionally the public schools, which is what they're supposed to do. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you very much for your testimony. There's somebody else? Please identify yourself.
My name is Sandy Royal. I live on Lake Road East, off of Bass Lake Road. Here's my concern. I don't claim to be the smartest person in the world, but it's my understanding the reason we have all these millions of dollars, the Chardon has all these millions of dollars, is the people have voted for these levies. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay, so people have spoken.
Right.
This county has a problem listening to the people, okay? My children
graduated from Chard. I had 2 children. Now I have 4 grandchildren at Chard. I think it's a wonderful school system. Buildings aren't so good. That's what they're preparing for. They're preparing for what they did to Munson already. They had to fix up the outside to keep it going. Our schools are aging. And we need this. We're being responsible, we're being punished for it. We're being fiscally responsible and we're being punished like we're money grabbers. There's money in this county, as you all well know. That's why many of us live here, is so we can live a nice, peaceful, quiet life and educate the people we have brought into this world properly. This seems like a local control thing. You know, I mean, you have not presented anything that we have spent money wrongly or irresponsibly. I didn't hear that at all. You are bothered by the fact that we have these millions and we need probably 3 times this to build the school we need, desperately need, instead of keep putting Band-Aids on it, lots of Band-Aids. And I agree, you had nothing to do with this building. This building, if you drive around Chardon and see all the empty buildings that are sitting there, because everybody had to come into here to justify building this building, is a joke. It's a joke. Is anybody saying anything about that?
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yes,
Melanie Scanlon. My address is 10120 Wilson Mills Road in Chardon. I think you have every right as the Budget Commission to ask questions, and I respect all the work that Deb and Dr. Hanlon put into this. From where I'm sitting, the tone, the laughing, the snickering, it sows seeds of mistrust within the community, that the community should think that the school is being irresponsible and not to be trusted. And so I think my ask of the group would be, when coming to these presentations, come with an open mind, come asking questions. Don't come with a game with where I'm sitting seems like gotcha as a way to tell the public that there might be a reason not to trust the school district, because I have worked on several campaigns with Deb and Mike, and I have found them to be nothing but 100% transparent and trusting. I've sat with Mike on a Saturday morning in Beans, where he spent an hour talking to a couple who live in the community, explaining why the funding is the way that it is. So I think the way that you question could lead people to believe that there's reason not to trust these professionals, when I have seen nothing but professionalism, transparency, and a high level of communication as a parent and as a community.
thank you very much. I'd like everybody to realize there was a motion to approve the budget. There was a motion to offer a second to approve the budget, and we have yet to call the question. So far, this Budget Commission is on board supporting the school budget that's proposed.
I get that.
Nobody's voted no yet,
I understand.
okay?
But there seems to be threats of like, if you don't, we're gonna, it doesn't feel in good spirit from where I'm sitting as a community member.
I need to communicate it clearly to them. I mentioned in passing last year that they had too much money and I was attacked for 3 weeks.
And they spent it though, haven't they? Been.
Yeah, they are proposing spending it. And I am concerned because a big chunk of that proposal seems to be dependent. It's a local match to money that I don't think they're going to get from the state. Okay. So that's why I want to be very clear. I don't want any confusion next year. If the money's not spent, I'm going to be taking a hard look at that.
No, and I appreciate the clarity on that. There are other side laughing and things like that I just think is unprofessional and is not respectful of the work that these people do in all of the schools. So that's it. End of comment.
Call the question?
Anybody else? Okay.
Aye.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, look at that. Unanimous support. After all that. So I encourage all of you to come at future school budget hearings. We have them regularly. They are public hearings.
How do our other hearings? We've taken money away from the library, we've taken money away from the county, any other political subdivisions that are overfunded.
in other items.
Yeah,
It's about.
you're welcome to stay and listen about Montville, Bainbridge, Newberry, South Russell, Huntsburg, and Munson.
You need me for my, sir.
We're waiting.
You need me for any questions on it?
Deb, you want to stay and get your resolution?
Yes, but do you need me for anything on?
We can find it.
I don't think so.
No.
Okay, thank you. No.
Give you your resolution if we find it.
Yeah.
We don't know where it went.
Could it be in the file?
I do not have it. I know that.
Is who?
Okay, come on.
This made motion.
Well, we can get another
Speaking of
one
this
sent.
Taj Mahal, how is there only one bathroom on this? It's like a wait every time I go in there.
There's actually another one.
There is?
In the commissioner's hallway.
Oh, in the commissioner's hall.
Nothing.
Oh.
Packing of that.
Could it be in here? Any possibility?
We'll give her the certificate and we can scan a little.
Maybe it's in this pile.
That's okay, John. We'll just scan over the rate resolution to her. Does she have a certificate? Do we have to?
No, I mean, we have to.
Here they are.
Oh.
So. Chris.
Yes.
Sure. I seconded. it. You
No, I made the motion, yeah.
You're not fast.
No excitement for Montville Amendment number 2? You're here.
Good. Have you been here all along?
Yes.
Oh, how nice.
So regular business, we've got Chardon Local School 2023-2024. It's amendment number 4. Net adjustment to special revenue of 257,704.10. The special revenue fund total is $7,917,422. Total certificate, $82,807,793.95, and appropriations do not exceed.
So
Second, yes.
Aye.
Burton Public Library, it's amendment number 1 for them. New general fund total, $1,656,50.12. Special revenue, $62,191.39. Capital projects, $380,843.41. Total certificate is $2,099,084.92. Net change over original is $587,674.27. Temporary appropriations do not exceed.
It's kind of a big differential on a $2 million. So moved.
Second.
Yes.
Aye.
Montville Township, amendment number 2. They're increasing special revenue in their carryover balance adjustment. They had a voided check. New special revenue fund total is $1,527,791.04. Total certificate, $1,491,004. Total certificate, $1,895,213.45. Temporary appropriations.
So moved. Second.
Yes.
Aye. Yes.
Bainbridge Township, amendment number 2, they're increasing their EPA grant by $157,541.87. New special revenue fund total, $18,766,910.33. Total certificate, $26,717,122.10. Temporary appropriations do not exceed.
So moved.
Second, yes.
Aye.
Sunbury Township, amendment number 1, new general fund total, $1,463,330.95. Special revenue, $5,519,690.75. Capital projects, $801,254.34. Total certificate, $7,784,276.04. Net change over certificate is $3,004,785.25. Temporary appropriations do not exceed. It's all in general.
So moved.
Second? Yes.
Yes.
South Russell Village, amendment number 2, they're doing a net adjustment to their special revenue of $15,156.02 and a net adjustment to capital projects of $150,000. New special revenue fund total, $6,932,820.03. New capital project, $1,200,330.46. Total certificate, $10,217,447.84.
Which is special revenue fund again?
$6,932,820.03.
No, 6,947,976.05.
Probably that's correct.
So moved.
What was your total?
What, 10,217,447?
10,382,603.86.
That one is?
Yes,
You didn't check this one?
I did.
Oh, okay.
I'm predicting it was
So moved.
9.
We can do it tomorrow. No, well, we can re-sign it tomorrow. That's
No,
fine.
you said that one.
You think this one's right? The
Yeah,
one we have?
that's right.
Whose turn is it?
Keep motion here. It's your second.
Second?
It's,
Well, wait.
no,
What are we
it was
doing?
Chris's.
Emotion,
Chris made a motion.
but this is the correct one, right?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Huntsburg Township Amendment number 1, new general fund total, $444,245.26. Special revenue fund, $2,105,702.32. Capital projects, $10,414,049. Total certificate is $2,560,362.07. Net change over original, $871,491.98. Currently, appropriation measures have not been submitted.
So moved.
Second. Yes.
Aye.
Munson Township, amendment number 2, they have a decrease in their beginning balance. It's a fund balance adjustment. Money was put from opioid fund into the general fund. They have a net adjustment to special revenue fund of $423,669.13. And an increase to special assessments for that demolition expense that we're collecting for, and then a reclassification of that scholarship fund. The new general fund total is $1,826,205.45. Special revenue, $4,001,812.92. Special assessment, $2,030. Total certificate, $5,830,048.37, and appropriations do not exceed.
So moved.
Second?
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Geauga Trumbull Solid Waste, they have a supplemental appropriation. They're increasing fund 6020 or decreasing in contract services by $24,999.60. Total fund appropriations available will then be 0.
Chuck's motion.
We just need to approve this, no signature.
No signature.
So moved.
Second.
Yes.
Aye.
Anything else?
General session.
Public comment? There's, floor is cleared.
No comments.
No?
Okay, motion to make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Yes.
You all.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, that was fun. Tomorrow's only 2.
Yeah, but
Yeah, we gotta go.
I gotta do my PowerPoint for tomorrow.
Yes, we did. I did that.
Yeah. No, it isn't.
No, no, no.
Oh, this is the C 14 and the 15.
Yeah, yeah. That's 2023.
It's interesting. The voters have spoken numerous times.
He did. It's part of it. We have photo
It's wonderful having them passionate about their school,
Right.
but they can't really pass.
Hey, Chuck.
They don't need a levy.
Kate. Kate.
Oh,
Hey, guys, can you end the recorded
Oh, that's
session?
recording.
Recording.
Thank you.